And we do have a quorum present. So I will call this meeting of the Madison Plan Commission of January 9th to order. First, we will hear from our technical facilitator, Jesse.
All right, welcome to our virtual Plan Commission meeting. We're going to cover a few basic items before beginning. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in the original email. To members and city staff members, if you are able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you are able, please activate your video when you are speaking. Use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak or ask questions. Staff, click raise hand when you are asked a question. The chair will do their best to call on committee members in the order in which their hands are raised. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. The clerk will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the commission, please send it to the email listed in today's agenda. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jesse. First, communications, disclosures, and recusals. Members of the body should make any required disclosures or recusals under the city's ethics code. Are there any disclosures or recusals? Seeing no raised hands, we'll move on to agenda item 1, which is public comment. And I don't see that there's any public comment. Is that correct, Heather? Okay, very good. Then the next item is minutes of the December 8th special meeting and the December 12th regular meeting. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes of either of those meetings? I don't see any raised hands. Is there a motion to approve both those sets of minutes? Moved by Commissioner Cantrell. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Shepard. And I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, both sets of minutes pass unanimously. Next is schedule of meetings. We have regular meetings on January 23rd, February 13th, and February 27th. Next, we'll go on to the consent agenda. It's a custom of the Plan Commission to remove from the consent agenda those items on which the staff believes an application has had sufficient review to warrant approval with all of the conditions placed upon it by various city departments, on which the applicant accepts those conditions, and there are no individuals who have registered to speak in opposition to the item. Those items, along with referrals, are placed on the consent agenda. And then persons who are interested in those items can exit the meeting if they wish. Unless a member of the Plan Commission requests separation, in which case the item is removed from the consent agenda and taken in the regular course of business. And I'll read through the agenda items of those items that are proposed for the consent agenda. Agenda item 3. Agenda item 9, 10, 11, and then agenda items 12, 13, and 14 would be referred to January 23rd. And then for consent, agenda item 15, 16, and then agenda item 17 would be referred to June 12th. Are there requests for removing any of those items from the consent agenda? Seeing no raised hands, I'll read each of those then into the record. So agenda item 3, Legistar 74912, authorizing the City of Madison Planning Division to prepare the Northeast Area Plan. Agenda item 9, Legistar 74540, located at 3809 East Washington Avenue, 3rd Alder District, consideration of a demolition permit to demolish a financial institution. Agenda item 10, Legistar 74543, located at 2300 South Park Street, 14th Alder District, consideration of a conditional use in the commercial corridor transitional district for a building exceeding 5 stories and 68 feet in height to allow construction of a 6-story private parking facility at the Village on Park. Agenda item 11, Legistar 74544, located at 304 Lakota Way, 9th Alder District, consideration of a conditional use in the suburban residential varied 2 district for a residential building complex containing 20 apartments in 5 buildings. And then agenda items 12, 13, and 14. Legistar 74259, Legistar 74624, and Legistar 74260 to be referred to the January 23rd, 2023 meeting. Agenda item 15, Legistar 74898, located at 7412 Winona Way, 14th Alder District, consideration of a demolition permit to demolish a single-family residence. Agenda item 16, Legistar 74899, located at 7412 Winona Way, 14th Alder District, consideration of a conditional use to allow a new single-family residence to be constructed on a lakefront property. And finally, for referral, agenda item 17, Legistar 74885, to be referred to the June 12th, 2023 Plan Commission meeting. I will open the public hearing, and there are no registrants wishing to speak, so I will close the public hearing. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? Moved by Commissioner Cantrell. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Shepherd. I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the consent agenda passes unanimously. Okay, moving back to the items that are not on the consent agenda. First is agenda item 2, Legistar 74682, adopting the Shadywood Neighborhood Development Plan as a supplement to the City of Madison Comprehensive Plan. And Kirsty Lotch is going to give us an overview of that. Kirsty?
Yes, thank you. I'm going to share my screen to get started here. Okay. Are you seeing the full screen? Not the notes, full screen?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So I'm Kirsty Lotch, they, them pronouns, work in the planning division, joined with my colleague Jeff Greger. Sorry, Jeff. Jeff Greger. We're going to talk about the Shadywood Neighborhood Development Plan. So after the informational presentation that we gave to the Plan Commission on October 24th, we incorporated the Plan Commission's recommendations, and the draft plan was introduced and referred to Transportation Planning and Policy Board and Board of Parks for review. So I'm going to start with just a little bit of a brief background for anyone that may have missed the last meeting, and then focus mostly on what's been revised in the plan since October 24th, and then talk about the recommendations from the 2 boards. And this is all also outlined in the memo. The planning area, Shadywood Neighborhood Development Planning Area, is on the far southwest side. Midtown Road is the northern boundary. Woods Road is the eastern boundary. And this is University Ridge Golf Course, approximately 435 acres. And the Ice Age Trail is planned to run through this area. The NDP makes recommendations for land uses, housing types, covers transportation, makes recommendations regarding open space, focusing on the Ice Age Trail corridor, along with stormwater management recommendations. It covers utilities and services, and has a section on sustainability. So a main purpose, as I've mentioned, is to pursue the Ice Age Trail through this area, and further refine that wide Ice Age Trail corridor as it was adopted in the 80s. This sort of light green color is the wider corridor that the plan sort of pares back and refines. The area overall has varied topography, including rolling hills and steep slopes, as well as several glacial kettle ponds. And Richardson's Cave is another one of the many very unique environmental features in this area that we would like to preserve. And then I just wanted to mention that the results of the recently completed Lower Badger Mill Creek watershed study informed the plan's recommendations, including making sure that we're setting aside adequate locations for stormwater management. So I'm going to jump into the changes that have been made in the plan since the October 24th Plan Commission meeting. So at that meeting last time, we discussed the density ranges for Housing Mix 1 and Housing Mix 2 categories, as well as the amount of Housing Mix 3 that we're showing on the Land Use and Street Plan, this map here. So at the direction of Plan Commission, we made a slight expansion to the amount of Housing Mix 3 included on Map 7. So that's outlined in this red. So we, at the direction of Plan Commission, added this half block here to the west, which was previously shown for Housing Mix 2. So a little bit of additional Housing Mix 3. And then another pretty minor revision was to update Figure 1 to better represent the mix of housing types that we could anticipate in Housing Mix 2 areas. So the previous version of this map or this figure had a much larger swath of single-family residential. So we made some minor revisions, adding a few more townhomes and duplexes to try to more accurately depict the sorts of housing types that we would expect in this Housing Mix 2 area. So yeah, those changes are outlined in the red here. Additional townhomes, some duplexes in these areas, as well as up towards Midtown Road. And also, yeah, that change to the Housing Mix 3 expansion over in this area as well. Then in terms of the draft transportation recommendations, because Complete Green Streets was still moving through the review and adoption process when this draft plan was released, we removed the detailed street cross section figures, and instead the plan just references the street types that are outlined in the Complete Green Streets framework. And then in addition, during the informational presentation that we gave to Transportation Policy and Planning Board at their October meeting, they recommended the addition of a shared use path that would connect from Shady Oak Lane into the new development area. So that's outlined here in this red. That path alignment, it corresponds to the Madison Metropolitan Sewerage District Lower Badger Mill Creek sewerage interceptor. And that interceptor is shown on the utilities map as well. So there's been discussion about the possibility of a shared use path being built as part of the interceptor project for a while. Staff recently met with MMSD about that project. MMSD is, exploring the alignment of the interceptor through this area because it needs to be built. But it's, sort of noted that getting a path through that area could be quite difficult due to the terrain. So we've included this path in the plan so that it can be considered as part of that project, but the alignment of that path could potentially change. And then I just wanted to go over the recommendations from the two boards. So Board of Park Commissioners, when we presented at Board of Park Commissioners in December, the only question that they asked was just a question about Richardson's Cave. And then they recommended approval to the plan without any changes, and that motion passed unanimously. When we visited TPPB, there was a comment from the public that was submitted, and in response to that, TPPB asked if there was a shared use path proposed along Woods Road, and they asked that the plan text be updated to reflect that proposed shared use path. The plan does recommend that shared use path, and is shown on the maps. So their motion was to return to the lead recommending approval with the following comments to clarify in the plan text that the proposed shared use path is along the west side of Woods Road. Upon further review, staff, our opinion is that the plan text does already address this comment. There's I think it's the second paragraph on page 15. There's also a link in your memo if you're looking at that electronically. There's a paragraph on page 15 that describes the proposed shared use path along the west side of Woods Road. It's staff's opinion that additional text isn't needed, but additional text could be added on page 14, the preceding page in the paragraph describing Woods Road. But our opinion is that it's not necessary due to the existing text on page 15. That is an overview of the changes and recommendations. I'll turn it back to the chair.
Okay, thank you, Kirsty. Are there any questions in regard to the plan? Commissioner Cantrell.
Yes. I have a question about the shared use path that goes up, and I can't. Could you bring up the plan back? Bring the plan back.
Yes.
So I could see. Okay.
Oh, did I go past it? There we go. Sorry.
Yeah. From Shady Oak Lane, it looks like that shared use path is the backyards of several single-family homes. That's probably going to be very difficult in securing, in my opinion, since I've done similar projects like this. Why wouldn't you just use, since it's a cul-de-sac road just north of that, why wouldn't you just use that cul-de-sac street and try to punch through a path to the Ice Age Trail?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, the reason that we have included this alignment is it's been talked about previously, MMSD had been aware of that previously as well. I think that it is certainly a possibility that MMSD might explore potential ways that they could instead use that street and that cul-de-sac. But ultimately, I think we just made the decision to go with that alignment as that's how it's been previously suggested.
Well, I think it's a good goal, but I think ultimately you may have to go through some other options, because I think that may be kind of difficult to obtain. But I think is a planned goal. I think it's I guess, appropriate to pursue that. But I'm just concerned that may never be in that alignment. But I'm assuming the plan has some flexibility. That's the goal. It may be a different option.
It looks like Jeff Greger had something to add. Jeff, did you want to add something?
Sure. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, the purpose of showing it is exactly that, to evaluate the alignment. The plan does have flexibility. If the MMSD sewer follows that northern cul-de-sac and up through, that's where the path would follow. The idea is this path would be multi-use. It would be for bicycles and pedestrians, but it would also be for access for MMSD to clean out their manholes and that sort of thing that go up through the corridor. So the idea is to follow whatever corridor MMSD takes. So,
okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah. Did you have anything further?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Fernandez.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just going to point out, I agree with Commissioner Cantrell. Of course, it's always going to be difficult to get a path like that through there, but punching it through to the Ice Age Trail, just to note that that's only a walking trail, so that would not complete the length. So it is important, I think, to continue to show it that way. And sometimes in the course of gaining the easements for a sanitary sewer, it's possible to gain the easement for a path corridor. So I think it's a good thing to show on the plan, at least.
Thank you, Commissioner. I had a question in regard to, I think it was maybe the prior slide where it said view opportunity.
Sure.
And it showed, there, that red view opportunity. What's that a view of?
Yeah, so that this particular area right here is the terminal moraine, and it has a view going south west of the sort of the outwash in that area. So my understanding is you can see quite a ways. I'm blanking on, I think there may be another way to describe that, not outwash. But yeah, it's a view where you can see southwest for quite a long ways.
I see. Okay. And my understanding is that the Parks Commission had a question about Richardson Cave. And what was the answer to that question?
Yeah, so they asked if the plan made any specific recommendations about Richardson's Cave being open to the public. And I think that the answer is somewhat unknown or complicated. If I recall right, there's some issues with the cave flooding, which could be dangerous for the public having access, as well as maintaining a space like that, which is very secluded and could result in some things that you just wouldn't want to happen in public areas or in public parks. So I think that the plan doesn't make any recommendations about whether or not that cave needs to be open for public access. The Ice Age Trail corridor could, that particular area could remain in private property with easements to get through the trail. So I think that it's just undecided whether or not public access will be made at this time.
Okay, thank you, Kirsty. Are there any other questions? Seeing no raised hands, I'd be looking for a recommendation on adopting the Shady Woods plan. Commissioner Cantrell.
A recommendation that the Plan Commission recommend approval of the Shadywood Neighborhood Development Plan as written.
Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Shepherd. Are there any, did you wish to speak to your motion, Commissioner Cantrell?
Just real briefly, I think this is an excellent neighborhood plan that staff prepared, and it's the Ice Age Trail is very important, I think, and especially in southern Wisconsin, and throughout the state actually. And I think that this plan incorporates it, and I think that's a great goal, and that's why I'm wholeheartedly supporting this plan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Any other comments, input? Seeing no raised hands, we'll come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. I'm glad to see Commissioner Spencer was able to sign in. Hello. Okay, the next item on our agenda is agenda item 4, Legistar 60917, creating sections of the Madison General Ordinances to amend a planned development district at property located at 115 West Doty Street, 4th Alder District, to approve an amended general development plan and creating sections to amend a planned development district to approve a specific implementation plan. First, we will hear from staff, Colin Punt. Colin.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. Before the Commission now is a request for the amended PD GDP SIP zoning for the renovation of the Dane County Public Safety Building, also known as the PSB, and construction of a 6-story addition as part of the Dane County Jail Consolidation Plan, all to combine all residents from the 2 existing locations at the PSB and the City County Building into this one location. The site for the South Tower addition to the PSB is currently a surface parking lot on West Wilson, which includes a loading dock and 2 vehicular ramps, one that accesses the courthouse garage and the other that accesses the lower level of the PSB. Access to that underground parking will continue to be from West Wilson, as well as 2 enclosed interior docks for loading and waste collection. All other entrances for the PSB will remain on Doty and Carroll Streets. The UDC has reviewed this as it is a planned development and has recommended approval without any additional conditions of their own. And staff believes that the standards for zoning map amendments and PDs can be met. And I'm happy to answer any questions after the public hearing.
Thank you, Colin. I will open the public hearing. The first registrant is Jan Horsfall, University Row, Madison, Wisconsin, in support, wishing to speak, representing Potter Lawson. Jan, you have 3 minutes.
All right, Chair, there are multiple people under the name Potter Lawson. So if the person, Jan, could you raise your hand so I could figure out which person you are? Excellent, thank you. Okay, you should be seeing a prompt to unmute yourself now.
I do.
Okay. Jan, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Good evening. This project started out many years ago. It was the original goals of the Sheriff's Office was to provide a safe, secure, and humane environment for those committed to custody through the fair treatment in respect of respect, and dignity. If you want to move to the next slide. And then the next slide. So the goals of the project were to consolidate into one facility as part of that would be to replace the outdated cell blocks in the CCB. Also provide a location in the downtown next to the courthouse. We would also vacate the Ferris Center. This would also help improve the staffing efficiencies and the operational costs. We're also looking at providing appropriate medical and mental health, video visitations to the housing units. You add programming, minimize the impact during construction, reduce solitary confinement, and also reduce the total number of beds. Next slide. To do this project in one consolidated facility, we would be vacating the 6th and 7th floors of the city county building. We would do some remodeling in the public safety building. The Ferris Center, located out by the Alliance Center would be vacated, and we would then create the South Tower addition in the parking lot behind the PSB building. Next slide. These are photos of the existing jail cell blocks in the CCB. They are vintage 1998, I believe, and 1990 or 1953. They have reached their usefulness. We want to get out of this building as soon as possible. And the next slide is once again showing the downtown location. And I will yield my time to Jeff Heil if he's available.
Okay, thank you. The next registrant is Jeff Heil, 115 West Doty Street, Madison, in support, wishing to speak, representing the Dane County Sheriff's Office. Jeff, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. As you said, I work for the Sheriff's Office. I'm a lieutenant assigned to the Security Service Division. I work with our transition team working to bring the new jail project to reality. I'll talk to the next couple slides here as to some of the specific points that Jan highlighted. Our new facility will replace the city county building direct supervision housing units, which will put our staff directly in the housing unit, like the picture on the right, as opposed to a linear style facility where we don't have as much of an idea what's going on in the jail cells, and we can improve safety and security to provide a better living environment for the residents in our custody. Our new facility will provide recreation and programming space on each housing unit and provide treatment and programming that'll help reduce recidivism. As everyone knows, staffing a facility is the largest operating cost. So one of the goals of this project is to reduce our operating costs. And we believe going from 3 separate jail facilities to one consolidated facility will help provide efficiencies and improve our staffing. Move to the next slide. Our medical spaces are significantly lacking in the existing facilities. Our new design has a robust medical component with about 20% of the beds being specialized beds dedicated to medical and mental health use. The housing unit provides different types of housing for medical needs, including medical observation beds for individuals going through drug and alcohol withdrawal, and medical staff would be assigned directly in the housing units with our deputies to provide needed care. This would help us meet HIPAA requirements and the National Correctional Healthcare Administration accreditation. The next slide speaks to our mental health spaces. Again, the existing spaces are essentially segregation cells that provide no programming opportunities and are very isolating. The new facility provides sub-day rooms and larger open spaces that are more conducive to rehabilitation, reducing stress and reducing wellness for the residents. There's different types of mental health housing depending on the different needs of individuals that were in our custody. The next slide highlights some visitation on the housing units. Currently, our visitation in the city county building is extremely limited and doesn't provide a lot of professional space for professional visitors and attorneys to meet with their clients who are in our custody. The new facility will provide greater visitation opportunities at the housing units, and the center drawing shows enhanced centralized visitation for non-contact through glass for personal and professional visits for our residents. We'll also provide video visitation kiosks in each of the housing units. The next slide highlights our multi-purpose and program spaces. These are attached to each of the housing units, whereas now we have a very inferior space that's shared throughout the facility. By putting the housing units directly in each of the housing units, the exercise and program spaces will provide more opportunities for exercise and rehabilitation, and also give us more space for the more than 30 programs that we have within the jail facility. Slide 12 shows our goal to reduce solitary confinement. Individuals with mental health needs and medical needs currently are placed in segregation cells, and the new environment will promote better mental health and better interaction between individuals and reduce the isolation of the cells. And finally, slide 13 of my presentation, we currently have 1,013 beds between 3 jail facilities that include cells, dorms, and rooms at the Ferris Center. This project will reduce us to 825 beds. We're able to accomplish this through greater use of electronic monitoring for sentenced residents, reduce of Huber, and eliminating Huber at the public safety building. And this program will then give us specific bed types for all classifications, as we have to separate minimum, medium, and maximum individuals as well as co-defendants. And slide 14 shows the focus of the project on...
Thank you, Jeff. That does conclude your available time.
Okay.
The next registrant is Doug Hirsch, University Row, Madison, Wisconsin. In support, wishing to speak, representing the Dane County Sheriff's Office. Doug, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Doug Hirsch with Potter Lawson, and we're part of the architectural and design team along with Mead and Hunt here in Madison. And I will briefly go over the exterior of the building for the Plan Commission members. The next slide shows the location of the building. Just to understand that this site has the entrance to the PSB parking and to entrance to the courthouse underground parking, as well as loading and trash for the PSB, the courthouse, and the CCB as well. The next slide shows the overall site plan and where the South Tower addition is. And just one thing to keep in mind is that along this block, there are no other loading or access for the site. And so all of that will occur on the ground floor of the new South Tower. Next slide. The design of the building is meant to be a long-term, low-maintenance exterior facade of terracotta tiles, which should last forever. They'll be put up in a rain screen system so that there's minimal maintenance and will stay looking good for a long time. It also adds color to this part of the city where a lot of the buildings are fairly bland. The lower floor is set back, and those are the access points to the ramp, which have been combined, and then 2 garage doors for access to loading and trash. The next slide also shows the building from West Wilson Street. The idea was to get a lot of natural light into the building, into the center of the building, particularly into the common spaces, so that all of the spaces on the interior have natural light. The random pattern allows us to place the windows where they're needed. As far as the Capitol View preservation, we're well below it. The building has been reduced in height by 1 floor. On the next slide, please. A view of the building at night. The windows are frit coated, which will allow the daylight to come into the building, but will not allow views into the building. The next slide. We spent some time with urban design, kind of working on the pedestrian aspect of the building, and have added sort of additional plantings as well as glass and murals on the inside of that glass. The next slide. And this is just a view from Fairchild Street as the building sits behind the current public safety building. Next slide.
Thank you, Doug. That concludes your available time.
Thank you.
The next registrant is Andrew Laufenberg, University Row, Madison, in support, wishing to speak. Andrew, you have 3 minutes. Oh, he's representing Potter Lawson. Andrew, you have 3 minutes.
I'm sorry. I'm supposed to be on the St. John's project, the next one.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. That concludes the folks who wanted to speak to this item. There are some other registrants. Todd Draper, Alliant Energy Center, Wisconsin, neither support nor oppose, not wishing to speak but available to answer question. Representing Dane County Public Works, Chris Harp, Deming Way, Middleton, support, not wishing to speak but available to answer questions. Representing Mead Hunt. And Steve Richards, Alliant Energy Center Way, Madison, neither support nor opposed, not wishing to speak but available to answer questions. Are there questions of any of our registrants? Commissioner Cantrell.
Could someone talk about the sustainability aspects of the building? Stormwater, are they proposing any type of a solar on the roof or other things like that?
Doug, would you be able to answer that question or direct us to who on your team could?
Yes, I am unmuted. I can speak to it. I think maybe Jan can also add to it. One of the things you saw on the slides was we have a blue roof and a green roof on top of the building. So to take care of stormwater, it does not have solar panels at this time, but is set up to be able to take that. There are a lot of sustainable features as far as the HVAC, plumbing, and lighting. I'm not sure if you want to go into all of those, but some of the highlights, I guess, we've got heat recovery wheels on the intake air to reheat the cold air that's coming in with the warmth of the exhaust air that's going out. There's variable frequency drives on all the fans and pumps. There's indoor air quality measurements for outdoor air delivery monitoring. There's increased infiltration so that the indoor air for the indoor air quality. We have gas detection systems in the ramp and dock areas to reduce ventilation requirements. Let's see. There's also carbon dioxide sensors for densely occupied spaces, so that to make sure that we've got the right amount of fresh air coming into the space. We are working on Focus on Energy. It's a custom project incentive program. We're working with them on some chiller upgrades. The cooling tower has variable frequency drives, which reduces the energy that it uses. There will be third-party commissioning for the MEP system in the building envelope. As far as plumbing goes, there's all the low-flow plumbing fixtures as well as high-efficiency boilers. There's also electronic water management system that prevents overuse of water. And then as far as lighting and power goes, that we're using LED fixtures with occupancy sensors. There's LED fixtures with vacancy sensors in portions of the building so that the lights will go out. There are daylight responsive control strategies where some of the lights will dim with the amount of natural daylight. And then EV charging stations have actually already been installed in the basement of the building.
Great. Good. Well, thank you, Doug. That sounds like a very comprehensive list of sustainable improvements. One other question: the trash collection, is that occurring on the street or in the building, or how is that done?
I will let Jan answer that question.
Okay, Jan, can you respond to that, please?
I can. The trash collection occurs once a week, like on Wednesdays in the morning. It's picked up before, like around 6:30, and dropped back off by 7 o'clock. That happens one time a week, one day a week. The recycling portion of it, which is the recycling for cardboard, like in the compactors, that occurs once every other week. Once again, that would be in the morning, probably around 9 o'clock, where they would pick it up, and 10 o'clock when they bring it back. There is some containers that are picked up. Those would be also on the street. And those are probably also once a week type of a arrangement. The compactors, are picked up where the vehicle would back up to the garage door, pull the compactor out, and then leave with it. It takes about 2 to 8 minutes, depending on what kind of it is. But that's what that's how it has been designed.
I'm assuming that would block the sidewalk.
It would be, but once again, it's at 6 in the morning or 9 in the morning.
Okay. My last question is, what's the next option for expansion? I'm assuming the building is not being planned on additional floors or constructed with additional floors. So what if, because the city of Madison is growing another 50,000 in the next 20 or 30 years, we hope that we all have less crime, but that may not occur. But so what's the next option of expanding the jail here?
That would, there's a couple options. One would be to provide a satellite facility somewhere in Dane County, or the other option would be the property right next to it. That's kind of a long-term option, depending on the owners of that property. But sure. if it comes to that point and that property is still not available and they do have to expand, it would probably be a satellite facility.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for the question, for the answer to that question. That's all I have at this point.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Cantrell. Commissioner Fernandez. You're muted. Can you unmute yourself? There you go.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Not quite sure who to direct this question to, but is the funding and legislative approvals, are they essentially in place on this? And if so, when would you expect to break ground?
Jeff Heil, is that a question that you could answer?
I'll do my best to try to answer it. The county board is actively discussing the remaining $13.5 million of funding. We're anticipating having a deliverable at some point in April where we would have a final estimate. And then when it hits the street, as far as bidding, we would know the final actual cost. But at this point, the final cost is to be determined, but there's several discussions as far as funding the project completely.
Did you have
Okay.
any follow-ups, Commissioner Fernandez?
No, thank you. So I guess how I would interpret that is that this could come back to us in another form if that doesn't all materialize as hoped. The other question: does this include what's the disposition of the top two floors of City County? Does this include rehabbing them into usable space, or how is that related to this?
Jeff, is that something you could respond to, please?
All I can answer to that is that's not within the scope of this project. We don't know what the future use of the City County building 6 and 7 floors would be. That would be an additional public works project after this one, but
Okay,
that's certainly a possibility.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further, Commissioner Fernandez? No. Okay, Alder Heck.
Thank you. Just one quick question for the development team from Potter Lawson, I assume. I noticed in some of the renderings, there's one lone little street tree on Wilson depicted, but it's not really, I don't think, in the plans that I could find. I could be wrong though. And there's mention in the staff report or in the conditions recommended by staff that more street trees are needed, but I think that's somewhat boilerplate, and I don't really see anywhere for trees to go. Can you describe if that little street tree is the only one that would be planted as a result of this project?
Jan?
Yep, that would be the only tree that would be planted. It would be replacing the current street light at that location right now. We would add some street lights, on either side of our property, but that's the only location we have. That's why we kind of added some of the planters to actually provide some additional work. Right now, there are no trees along that side of our property.
I guess it's a net gain of one tree then. Thank you.
That's right. That is right.
Any further questions of any of the registrants? Seeing no raised hands, I will close the public hearing. Are there questions of staff? Are there questions of staff? Seeing no raised hands, is there a motion? Commissioner Cantrell.
I will move that the Plan Commission recommend and forward the zoning map amendment for approval, to amend the general development plan and to approve the specific implementation district for 115 West Doty Street and 118 West Wilson Street to the City Council with the recommendation of approval.
Okay, thank you. I see that Alder Verveer has raised his hand. I think we'll go to him before I look for a second. Alder Verveer.
Well, thank you very much, Chair Zellers, and good evening, commissioners. As you are all well aware, this proposal has been around for many, many, many years now. And every step of the way, Dane County officials, particularly from the Sheriff's Office, have engaged the surrounding neighborhood. And I want to start off by sharing that and publicly thanking former Sheriff Dave Mahoney, current Sheriff Calvin Barrett, their colleagues in the Sheriff's Office, Dane County Public Works, and their consultant team for meeting with the Bassett neighborhood early and often. Again, that's been over 3 years now as this project has dragged on and dragged on. It is also a very much a truism that I want to thank at the top all of the neighborhood stakeholders that have engaged in these conversations over the last 3 years plus, most recently at a neighborhood meeting last Thursday evening. It goes without saying that this proposal has been quite controversial at the county level. And as the applicants are well aware, proposal had been worked out by the Dane County Board and the county executive. That is not the case yet, as you heard Lieutenant Heil confirm for Commissioner Cantrell, I think it was. The reality is that I think that this has been confusing for some observers and stakeholders as to why we're going through the land use entitlement process now, when the funding is still apparently quite up in the air at the county level and might even be the subject of a voter referendum in April. With all that said, it is what it is, and we're here tonight. And obviously, despite the controversy in the community, and I have to admit I'm a little surprised there wasn't any testimony tonight from community members in opposition to the overall proposal, because that was the case at the last Urban Design Commission meeting. But with that said, obviously, your job is totally as this proposal, this application relates to the zoning code and the major alteration to the underlying plan development zoning for this parcels. So I am supportive of the motion before you. However, I do have some suggested conditions that I don't believe would be controversial to the applicants, and we have discussed these, although not the specifics per se, in the last day or two. Let me also just share, before I mention those couple of conditions, that it became quite clear to me and other stakeholders that this very much is an addition to the Dane County Public Safety Building, that the public will still enter and the vast majority of the staff will still enter from 115 West Doty Street, not from the 100 block of West Wilson Street. So what we're dealing with very much is a back of house operation here. And it's unfortunate that what you have before you is in many ways simply that, back of house operations, especially as it relates to the critical pedestrian experience. And that's the area where the neighborhood has concentrated their efforts over the last 3 years plus in our conversations with the county and their development team. Again, they've been very open and welcome to our suggestions. And I want to state that the design progression has absolutely improved throughout those many years of conversations as it relates to trying to activate the pedestrian experience. But the reality is that, the vast majority of the West Wilson Street frontage, of course, are these two large service driveways. And that's most unfortunate. But every way we've asked and in our conversations with the applicants, they can't avoid that. I think it's been explained at length in our neighborhood meetings and at the December Urban Design Commission meeting why that is. So again, it is what it is. With that said, there are still concerns in the neighborhood, particularly about how deliveries and waste and recycling removal will occur. And there still are concerns, I would say, about the very minimal landscaping, although it has improved again over time's passing here. So with that in mind, I was hoping that the commission would consider a couple of additional conditions that are a little more specific than the general staff conditions. First, as it relates to the issue of the deliveries and particularly the concern about the waste, the refuse, the recycling, removal, blocking the public right-of-way, both Wilson Street and the adjacent sidewalk for periods of time. First, in terms of the timing of that, as was requested at the neighborhood meeting last Thursday, there was consent by the county at that time. I can't say that they still are consenting, of course, but as of last Thursday evening, they did not find objectionable a condition limiting the refuse and recycling collection to after the hour of 9:00 a.m. So that was a specific request from adjacent stakeholders to the property that the activity not occur until 9:00 a.m. or later. And when you think about the traffic concerns of peak hours, of rush hour and so forth, it makes sense not having the street blocked for the trash compactor in particular during peak traffic periods. But beyond specifically mentioning no waste and recycling removal prior to 9 a.m., I also would encourage the commission to consider a condition that has been added over the years to some other downtown developments, and that is to require a commercial delivery plan and a waste removal plan to be submitted to the Traffic Engineering Division for their consideration and staff approval. Because I do think that it's important that our city traffic engineers are engaged, not just during the construction phase, which is what some of the conditions relate to that were proposed by Sean Malloy on behalf of traffic engineering, but that we look at the overall issue of the deliveries and at this key, downtown block, and given the large number of volume, both of not only motor vehicles, but also bicyclists and pedestrians. And then as it relates to landscaping, and I want to thank the commissioners for anticipating some of the areas of concern that have been discussed by the neighborhood. So thanks to particularly to Commissioners Cantrell and Heck for bringing these issues up. But as it relates to the lone street tree, I've requested since our first meeting back in 2019 that the county agree to include structural soil for that lone street tree. Now, I realize that the Board of Public Works and the Common Council have final say, if you will, over the development agreement that would include the public right-of-way operation here and what will be built as part of the development in the public right-of-way. But with that said, I've learned from some experience that if we have the conditions added at UDC or Plan Commission, that guarantees it get into the development agreement early on by the city engineering staff. So I would also look kindly upon an amendment to the motion before you that the street tree be planted with structural soil and that a tree guard around it also be installed. I think stakeholders and myself have concerns, including myself, have concerns with all of the truck and delivery activity on these two adjacent driveways that tree might be a goner and sooner rather than later in terms of an accident occurring. So anything we can do to allow that lone tree to survive, I think would be a great idea. I also considered asking you to consider an amendment encouraging the applicant to consider studying further the garage door placement of the windows and the size of the windows. It's something that the applicant promised to do at the Urban Design Commission meeting last month, but UDC admittedly did not include that as a condition or offer any conditions on their approval. Their approval, by the way, was not unanimous. There were 2 dissenting votes at UDC, again, I think largely because of the pedestrian experience not being optimal here. I don't recall hearing any of the urban design commissioners having concerns about the overall design of the building or certainly the height and massing, especially since the building's been reduced by 1 story due to the county policymakers deliberating over this the last few years. So those are my requests. I'm happy to answer any questions about those additional potential conditions. And thank you so much for your consideration.
Okay. Thank you, Alder Verveer. First, I'm going to ask for a second for the motion that Commissioner Cantrell made, and then loop back for questions to Alder Verveer. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Fernandez. And then are there any questions of Alder Verveer in regard to what he had to say? Seeing none, I am going to ask Commissioner Cantrell if you wish to speak to your motion.
Conditions that the alder has recommended. And I think I wrote them down correctly. And I think that if I didn't, then maybe Alder Revere can chime in, or staff can adjust the conditions that I'm proposing. First, that the waste and recycling deliveries be limited to after 9 a.m.
So are you proposing these as amendments to your motion? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to include them all at one time if I could. And
Okay,
then
we'll vote on your amendments first and then go back to the main motion. So go ahead, though.
Okay. That would be the first one. The second one is require commercial delivery and waste removal plan be submitted to city staff for review and approval. 3 would be include structural soil for the installation of the tree proposed along West Wilson Street, and tree guard.
Mm-hmm.
And lastly, that the urban design consider the window size of the garage doors along the on the garage doors along Wilson Street.
Is there Colin, did you have something?
Yes, I had a question regarding the final amendment that the Urban Design Commission consider changes to the windows and the garage doors. That this is not scheduled to return to Urban Design Commission.
Oh, okay.
Not that the Plan Commission cannot send it back for that review, but I just wanted to make that known that it at this time it's not going back to UDC.
Okay.
So I think
Thank you, Colin.
Yep.
And I think Alder Revere had something to say about those two. Alder Revere.
Yes. Thank you again, Chair Zellers, and thank you so much, Commissioner Cantrell, for your amendments. I wanted to make the same clarification that Colin did, that the county did receive final UDC approval. So if I misspoke and asked that a condition have this return to UDC, that was my mistake. I think what I was attempting to articulate is that at the Urban Design Commission meeting in December, some of the commissioners and the applicant continued further conversation about the window pattern and the size of the windows in the garage doors, and that the folks from Potter Lawson said that they would continue that conversation, continue studying that with the garage door manufacturer, but they were not optimistic. So I simply was suggesting that potentially through a condition that the applicant further, or be requested to further study and work with planning staff on potential redesign of the garage doors in terms of the windows, so the placement and size of the windows. Not that it returned to Urban Design Commission.
Okay.
So the amendment would be to encourage Potter Lawson to work further on the design of the garage windows. Is that correct?
Yeah. The applicant.
Thank
yes,
you.
The applicant, right. Thank you.
Yes, right. The applicant. Heather, did you have something you wanted to say?
Sure. 2 quick things on that. Just I would recommend on that one just to end it with a clause that would say for review by planning staff.
Yes.
And then on the one regarding the tree and the structural soil, my recommendation would be to recommend that the applicant include structural soil within that planting plan, and recommend that the council basically hold them to that in the developer's agreement, so that the rezoning itself isn't beholden to that, but we're making it clear that the Plan Commission is recommending that be part of the developer's agreement.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you very much for that, that help and clarification. Does that get to what you were looking for, Commissioner?
Yes. Thank all the alder and the planning director for those adjustments. Thank you very much.
Okay. Is there a second to those amendments that Commissioner Cantrell moved? Is there a second for the amendments? Seconded by Alder Paulson. Does anybody wish to speak to the recommended amendments? Commissioner Cantrell, did you wish to speak to those at all?
No, I think those are self-explanatory. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Alder Paulson, did you wish to speak to those?
Yeah, I just had a kind of a quick question about the first and second one with trash pickup hours, and then also a plan, working on a plan with staff. Should we just do we want to actually include that first condition, or do we just want to say, like, look, the plan that we're going to work out with traffic engineering should also address the appropriate time for trash pickup?
My understanding is that that the request was, and what was in the amendment proposed by Commissioner Cantrell, was the specific time of not before 9 o'clock.
Right. So I guess kind of what I'm asking a little bit of either staff or Alder Revere to maybe weigh in on it is if it makes more sense, if it's compatible to simply put this into the plan, or, just to have as a discussion item as we're getting into debating this amendment, if this is a good idea or not, or if we should not hard code into the condition this 9 a.m., but rather just leave it into a, hey, we should put into the the plan that traffic engineering is going to come up with should also consider this, just to get them some more flexibility.
I think, so Alder Revere, could you speak to that, please?
Yes, thank you again. Thank you for the question, Alder Paulson. I very much would like the commission to please include that specific condition relating to no refuse or recycling collection prior to 9 a.m. And that was a specific request at the neighborhood meeting last Thursday evening by Jim Carpenter, one of the owners of the adjacent properties, both across the street at 111 West Wilson Street, and the house, the lonely house that's adjacent to this site, as well as the Carpenter building at Carroll and Wilson, that he, on behalf of his dozens of tenants, felt that it would be too early prior to 9 a.m. And again, Lieutenant Heil, on behalf of the county and that meeting, thought that was a reasonable request, and thought that Pelletieri, their current contractor, currently doesn't come prior to that time in any event. So if this does become problematic, obviously, and it is included when the council considers this at our next meeting, it can always be reviewed through the minor alteration process and modified if it turns out to be a hardship for Dane County, it seems to me.
Thank you, Alder Revere.
Thank you.
Did you have any further questions, Alder Paulson?
No, I guess that I was glad to hear that it was a minor alteration, which means it doesn't have to come back to Plan Commission to change 9 a.m. if it turns out that 9 a.m. is a bad time to do this because it messes with traffic. So, okay. Thank you. That was
great.
That was very helpful.
Thank you, Alder. Commissioner Fernandez.
Thank you, Chair. I have absolutely no quarrel with the intent of all these conditions, but I would like to ask staff, if we place a condition like 9 a.m. trash pickup, does that, as part of this approval, does that place an enforcement burden on planning staff? I mean, how is this answered in the long term?
Heather, could you respond to that, please?
Sure. It would actually be a complaint-driven process whereby, let's say that one day that trash pickup happened at 7:30 a.m. and a nearby neighbor called the city. It would be actually building inspection or zoning's responsibility to enforce the plan development condition. my understanding is that we, the city, wouldn't be dictating that this has to happen at exactly 9 o'clock, but that it can't happen before 9 a.m. That's my understanding. So I think it's pretty flexible. But answer to your question would be that the burden for enforcement would fall on zoning, and it would be not something they would be looking at every day or every week, but it would be a complaint-driven response.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm hearing you say, Heather, that it doesn't constitute a problem. This wouldn't create some burden at this. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. I don't see any other raised hands, so we will come to a vote on the amendments. We will be voting on the amendments to the main motion. And we will come to a vote. I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the amendments to the main motion passes unanimously. Now we are on the main motion as amended. Are there any comments on the main motion as amended? If not, we will come to a vote. Commissioner Cantrell.
I just wanted to, speak to the motion.
Okay.
I guess this project's been long in the coming and long in the planning stages. And obviously it's necessary. We have a situation at the current jail that's inhumane. And I think this obviously is consistent with our city plans. And it's great that the county is consolidating the facilities because I think that is a cost saving to all citizens in Dane County. And I just hope that the facility is appropriately scaled and that we don't see a referendum on this. That's just my personal feeling. So, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. With that, we will come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. Moving on to agenda items 5 and 6, which are related and will be considered in a single public hearing. And first, we will so that's agenda item 5, Legistar 74057, located at 310 through 322 East Washington Avenue, 2nd Alder District, consideration of a demolition permit to demolish a place of worship. Agenda item 6, Legistar 74869, creating sections of the Madison General Ordinances to change the zoning of property located at 310 through 322 East Washington Avenue, 2nd Alder District, from urban mixed use district to planned development, general development plan district, and creating sections of the Madison General Ordinance to approve a specific implementation plan. And we will hear from Heather about this project. Heather.
Thank you, Chair Zellers. And I want to thank my colleague Tim Parks for reviewing this project. And I'll do my best to wear his hat this evening. So St. John's Lutheran Church is requesting approval on the 300 block of East Washington, right at the corner from Hancock Street, to demolish its existing place of worship and then rezone the site from the urban mixed use district to planned development, all to allow for the construction of a 10-story mixed use building. And that would include a worship space and also a roughly 5,000 square foot community space for community service providers. And finally, 130 apartment units, most of which would be funded by the city's Affordable Housing Fund, as has been recommended. This proposal is consistent with the downtown plan and comprehensive plan recommendations for this area, and staff believes that the Plan Commission may find that all standards for demolition and rezoning may be met. I want to draw your attention to just a couple key standards that are outlined in the report as well. First, with regard to the demolition, the Plan Commission should pay closest attention to standards 4 and 7, particularly noting that the advisory recommendation from the Landmarks Commission in this case is that the current church building does have historical significance, even while they also acknowledged that the 1960s changes to the building were significant in and of themselves. And then with regard to the planned development standards, the rezoning is primarily being driven by a design that is not meeting one of our zoning code provisions that's frankly really difficult to meet on sites that have a lot of grade change like this one. And I'm just going to take a moment to describe in general what that requirement is, and I'll let the applicant describe their take on why it's not being met. But the requirement is that for buildings with a commercial first floor, that the active space, the windows, the entries, et cetera, are all within an average of 18 inches of the city sidewalk or grade. Again, that's I understand where that's coming from. We as staff all do, but it is very difficult to meet on sites with this type of grade change. And you'll actually see 2 items on your agenda this evening facing the same challenge and dealing with it in different ways. So the planned development being sought is really being driven by that design issue. And then meanwhile, since they are going the planned development route, they're seeking 2 additional stories over and above the 8 allowable on the downtown height map. As noted in the staff report, they would also have been seeking 2 additional stories as a conditional use in this 8+2 area of the downtown. And the standards for approval of that additional height are really similar between the conditional use and the planned development process. We think that really the main, by and large, the plan development standards are met with this proposal, but I think that the Plan Commission should pay special attention to whether the proposed building can demonstrate a higher quality than what it could achieve at an 8-story building. That's really the key plan development standard related to the additional height. And I wanted to note that on December 14th, the Urban Design Commission did grant final design approval with no conditions. And they were looking at it from 2 different angles. One was their purview for reviewing building designs in Urban Design District 4. And then secondly, to advise you, the Plan Commission, on how to deal with the plan development zoning that's being requested. So they took into account the plan development standards, and the UDC has advised that those are met. Now I want to just take you to 2 other details that are really outside of the standards that I think you need to be focused on in your motion. The Plan Commission also needs to consider and make clear findings on 2 additional small details. One is relief from a screening requirement. So typically, commercial and mixed-use buildings like this must provide screening between their property and any residential properties adjacent to them. In this particular case, they have outlined in their letter of intent that the residential property to the north, that owner would actually prefer not to have a screening fence, but rather to have an expanded driveway entrance for their residential property. That is something that is supported by staff, but the Plan Commission would need to formally grant that. At this point, we don't have anything in writing from that residential property owner, but I understand that the applicant is more than happy to provide that as a condition of approval if the Plan Commission would like to see something in writing related to that request. And then secondly, and perhaps even slightly more complicated, is the bike parking that's been proposed. And the applicant will hopefully go into more detail about this as well. This is another issue that the Plan Commission, if they are to deviate from the zoning standards, even in a plan development, the Plan Commission would need to explicitly grant the authority to do so. And so they're not meeting the bike parking standards in 2 ways. First, for the outdoor required visitor parking, those 20 stalls are currently shown in the public right-of-way. This is not atypical at all for downtown sites, but it does require a privilege and streets agreement that the Plan Commission can't grant. And so, again, they haven't provided any outdoor bike parking on their private property, on the private property itself. And then within the parking structure, the applicant is showing an adequate number of bicycle stalls, but about 40% of them right now are shown right at the very front of a car parking stall. So wall mounted in front of where one would park their car, and they fail to meet the 5-foot access area requirement in the zoning code. And so we think as staff that there are many ways to solve or partially solve this issue. They could add some vertically stacked parking stalls where there are normal bike stalls today. They could potentially replace some of their storage space with bike parking. But, there are instances where this mix of wall mount in front of car and typical 2x6 stalls have been okay. But in any case, if they decide that they want to keep the design as it's shown in the plans right now, they would need explicit permission from the Plan Commission in order to do that and avoid the 5-foot access area that's otherwise required. So got right into the weeds with that one, but want to back up and just say that in general, staff believes again that the standards for demolition and plan development may be found met. And I think we've tried to draw your attention to specific standards for approval to focus on in your deliberation. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. We do have some registrants. I will open the public hearing. The first registrant is Peter Beeson, East Washington Avenue, Madison, in support, wishing to speak, representing St. John's Lutheran Church. Peter, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, and good evening, Plan Commissioners. My name is Peter Beeson, and I'm the lead pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in downtown Madison. And we, as Heather mentioned, are seeking your support to demolish our existing building and construct a new mixed-use building that will provide over 100 units of affordable housing, plus worship and vibrant community space. If you'd go to the next slide, please. St. John's has been in our current location for over 160 years, and we are committed to being a welcoming presence in the heart of the city, actively serving others. While we have been in downtown Madison for a long time, our building has always changed to serve the needs of our neighbors. And you can see from this slide how St. John's first building on the corner of Hancock Street and East Washington Avenue was a small timber building, and how that was replaced in the early 1900s with a stone and masonry building by Claude and Stark. Next slide. In this next slide, you can see how that building has had substantial additions and changes through the 1960s. While our proposed project is the biggest change to our site since the first building was erected, this change is congruent with our mission of serving those in need. In selecting our architect to partner with on this project, St. John's has continued our tradition of selecting local, noteworthy architects by working with the architectural firm of Potter Lawson, who themselves are celebrating over 100 years of business in Madison. Next slide. While we acknowledge that the Landmarks Commission voted to recognize that our building has historic value as a work by architects of note, and while thinking about giving up this space has been hard for many of our members, the reality is our existing building is inefficient, with multiple corridors and stairways leading to nowhere, and those are highlighted on this slide. It is also not universally accessible, which limits the activities and functions we can have on site and who is able to participate. At the same time, given the need for affordable housing in Madison, and the fact we have the opportunity to live even further into our mission, serve those in need, and create something that has more social impact and community good than our existing building, the congregation feels we are meeting the standard in the demolition code, that this project is in the interest of the health, prosperity, safety, and welfare of the people. In addition, the congregation is committed to saving, adapting, and reusing historic elements of our building in our new facility as a way of showcasing our history, while at the same time continuing to live into our mission and make an impact in downtown Madison for the next 150 years. Thank you for your time, and I yield the rest of my time to Mark Binkowski.
Thank you, Peter. The next 3 speakers have opted to pool their time, so these 3 speakers have 9 minutes total. First, we will hear from Mark Binkowski, East Doty Street, Madison, in support, wishing to speak, representing St. John's Lutheran Church. Mark.
Thank you, Plan Commission members. We appreciate you taking the time this evening. If you could go to the next slide. So as Pastor Peter mentioned, the focus on this project is the creation of affordable housing. St. John's is looking to extend its mission through that affordable housing. So out of the 130 total units, 108 of them, or roughly 85%, are set aside for those making less than 60% of the area median income. And at the same time, it's also critical to the project that we integrate St. John's with the partnering organizations and some of the community organizations that they have worked with in the past. If you can go to the next slide. One of the things that this project is intentionally doing is creating less parking to respond to the city's desire to have fewer single occupant vehicle trips downtown. So in total, 63 parking stalls beneath the building. We engaged a traffic engineer, KL Engineering, on a traffic impact analysis that found no significant traffic impacts are expected. And we also completed a preliminary traffic demand management plan that out of the required 9 points, the project is achieving 16. One of the things to note in response to Heather's comments about bike parking is that we are building about half as many parking stalls under the building as a market rate project would have, which means the parking ramp is about half the size. In addition, we have WIDA requirements to provide storage units for the apartments that you would not find typically in a market rate project. So one of the reasons we've located the bike parking stalls in front of the cars in some instances is because of the limited amount of area that we have in the bike or in the parking ramp. We have the same total bike parking stalls as a 130 unit project, but on a parking ramp that only has 63 stalls in it. If you could go to the next slide. Looking at a site plan here, one of the important considerations is the separation of the two separate entrances. So St. John's and its partnering organizations will have their entries along East Washington Avenue, similar to where St. John's current entrance is. And then on Hancock Street, we have the residential lobby. And it's really important that we have that separation between the entrances, so there's not a direct connection or an affiliation between the residential lobby and the church on East Washington. And you can see here on the north side of the site plan where we are proposing the extended driveway to accommodate the neighboring Hancock Center. If you go to the next slide, this is the lower level plan. You'll see the entrance into the residential space in purple off of Hancock Street. This provides for the lobby, management offices, some amenity space, as well as a large number of the storage units that are required by WIDA. On the next slide, you'll see the East Washington ground floor plan, which has the entrance to St. John's as well as the partnering organizations. One of the things that we really like about this is with the stairs that move up to St. John's front entry, it's really reminiscent of some of the older buildings that had that central stair leading to the front doors of the church. So we think that works really nicely. And on the next slide is the second floor plan. This highlights some of the residential amenity. We have a small outdoor roof terrace surrounded by green roof on the second floor. And then on the next slide is the typical residential floor plan, 15 units per floor, a mix of studios, 1 and 2 bedrooms, and a pretty efficient L-shaped design. And with that, I will turn it over to Potter Lawson.
The next speaker is Andrew Laufenberg, University Row, Madison, in support wishing to speak, representing Potter Lawson. And for our technical facilitator, he's registered under agenda item 4. So Andrew Laufenberger.
Yeah, hello. We can just go to the next slide, please. Okay, so here we're looking at the proposed development, and we're standing on the corner of East Washington and Hancock Street. Hancock is to the right of the paid image, and East Washington is running left to right. Programmatically, along East Washington, at the base of the building, it's cladded with a stone veneer panel, something very similar to the stone panels that are used on the existing church. And that stone panel is also broken up by a series of planters and gardening beds as you kind of move up the site. As you move towards the middle of the site, you're introduced to the monumental stairs that defines the entry to St. John's space. And then as you move a little bit further up the site, you come to the partnering space on the far left in the accessible entrance. At the first floor level, again, the partnering entrance is on that far left-hand side. And St. John's space is cladded with a series of stained and colored glass windows, giving it a very vibrant appearance on the site. Above that is are the apartments, and the apartments themselves are cladded with a brick veneer with punched openings that is then separated down the middle by a series of bronze anodized aluminum panels defining the church entry. And then to the right is a series of precast concrete framework. We can go to the next slide. And this is another close-up view of that elevation. We'll go one slide more. And so this is a quick site plan kind of showing the plantings that we're trying to establish on the site to really activate the street front and break up the scale of it. We'll go to the next slide. And this is an elevation of North Hancock Street where the apartment entry is allocated and how it activates the street. So again, that stone plinth wraps around the building. The amenity space for the apartment has an expansive amount of glass in it. And the entry itself stands out as a wooded slatted element there, right where it kind of says signage. Within the St. John's space above that with that stained glass, and then the apartments above that as well. We can go to the next slide. And just another view of that perspective. And we'll go one more just to the back of the building. And so this is the view of that green roof and that alley space where the Hancock Center is off to the left. So that punched brick facade is also wraps around the rest of the building. And one last final element is that 10th story is stepped back to give some relief of scale to the residential neighborhoods. With that, I'll give it over to Brian Reed.
The next registrant is Brian Reed, University Row, Madison, and support wishing to speak, representing St. John's Lutheran Church, Madison. Brian, you have the remainder of the 9 minutes.
Okay, thank you. This section just shows the diagrammatic organization of the building. Like Mark alluded to, there's really three sort of primary uses within the building: the St. John's first floor space, the partnering and community organization space, and then the residential component. Next slide. As Heather had alluded to as well, the proposed site does have significant grade change across it. This is just an enlargement of the lower levels of the former diagram showing the sidewalk elevation along East Washington Avenue dashed in for reference. You can see that there's significant change from one end of the site to the other. And we feel, again, that one of the most important aspects of this design is creating separate and distinct identities and entries for the three different components that St. John's and the partnering and community organizations preserve their identity along East Washington Avenue, while the residential entry has its own separate and distinct entry point off of North Hancock Street to provide significant distance between the two of them. Next slide. This just shows the reference point at the parking entry. With the proposed first floor elevation right now, we're basically just providing the minimum sort of 8'2" minimum clearance for van accessible stalls to be able to access the parking down below. Next slide. So we did look at a couple of different options as to how we could potentially be compliant with the zoning requirement for the 18 inches to be within 18 inches of the average sidewalk elevation. So we looked at stepping the first floor down. This created several challenges. It creates a fairly unusable or infeasible first floor plate because of the amount of ramping that occurs to be able to get to the different levels. It also then provides significant obstacles for individuals with mobility.
Thank you, Brian. That concludes the 9 minutes of pooled time. We have one other registrant wishing to speak, Bob Kleba, East Gorham Street, Madison, support and wishing to speak. Bob, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioners, and staff for your time. Mariah Renz and I co-chaired the steering committee for this proposed development. This particular proposal challenged us with poor community engagement, which is typical of the neighborhood. To their credit, though, the developers did work hard to encourage greater participation. Overall, participants were pleased with the proposal's design and purpose. The developers responded thoughtfully and adequately to feedback from steering committee members. Everyone recognizes that the proposal will fulfill many needs for the neighborhood and larger community. Furthermore, the history of the St. John's congregation has been one of social justice and adapting to a changing Madison. This proposal is the latest in changes the congregation proposes to undertake. There was no concern from the steering committee about changing the existing zoning to PD. In an adjacent development on the 400 block of East Washington, there was great concern about shading from the proposed 11-story development. There's only minimal concern about shading for this 11-story proposed development due to the low steering committee participation level. While the site is zoned for 11 stories on Hancock Street, the proposal will have an impact on available sunlight for residents all the way to Mifflin Street. Lastly, in the Commission's review of the proposal, it is important to consider the traffic demand management. Because of the current one-way configuration of North Hancock Street, all residential traffic will access the proposed building from the north, thus traveling through the James Madison Park neighborhood and on the East Mifflin Bike Boulevard. While the capacity of these streets is probably sufficient to bear the increase in traffic, that doesn't mean that neighbors won't be affected. The Commission should carefully consider Approval Standard 3 because of the impact of traffic from the proposed development, and Standard 4 because loss of low-density residential feel on this and adjacent blocks, which will encourage further development. And last but not least, Approval Standard 6 is important here because of the impact on the East Mifflin Bike Boulevard, which is a citywide and neighborhood resource. The city has worked hard to reduce motorized vehicular traffic on this thoroughfare with cooperation from other developers, signage, traffic diverters, and lowered speed limits. As a city, we need to preserve this cross-city bike boulevard. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Bob. We have one more registrant, Doug Hirsch, University Row, Potter Lawson, support, not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions, representing St. John's Lutheran Church. Are there questions of any of our speakers? Alder Heck.
Thank you. I wondered if I could ask Brian Reed to perhaps just better explain the aspect of the proposal related to the ground floor and the basement floor along East Washington and the slope related to PD standards, since that's something that we need to grapple with and understand.
Sure. So the project, we thought that the best approach for both city conditions for the neighborhood, et cetera, was to create two distinct access points to the building, one on Hancock Street for the residential entry, and then this sort of not necessarily shared, but side-by-side entry point for St. John's, as well as the partnering space off of East Washington. That, with the proposed design, we're slightly above basically the 18-inch allowed average sidewalk elevation because of the East Washington slope. So looking at alternates that would be compliant, basically the first option was one that I was speaking to that stepped down along with the sidewalk, but that provides quite a bit of obstacles within the footprint and basically eliminates any secondary entry off of North Hancock Street. The other option would be to lower the first floor. And then this also has some challenges with it where the North Hancock Street entry is still basically eliminated because you don't have enough headroom for people to be able to enter in. And then as well, it causes problems on the southern side of the site where then the first floor elevation, it starts to dig itself into the grade and isn't necessarily as accessible or as visible from the sidewalk as well.
Okay, thank you. I think I understand that now.
Okay.
That was my question for now.
Okay. Commissioner Fernandez.
Thank you. A quick question for Pastor Beeson. I think you've actually assuaged most of my concerns about the historical nature of this, but with something like 150 years at this site as a house of worship, it looks like the current facade doesn't even give a nod to its role as a house of worship. Has that been a concern in any way?
Thank you for the question, Commissioner. To the congregation, the stained glass, the colored glass on the first floor space is, in our mind, one of the best nods to our history and continuing presence as a worshiping community.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions, Commissioner Fernandez?
No, I believe I've got my questions answered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Cantrell.
I have a couple of questions. One for the minister. Are you preserving any relic of the interior space for and incorporating that into the new design, or any of the things from the existing church into the new space that you're creating here?
Thank you for your question, Commissioner. The plan and hope and goal of the congregation is to reuse a variety of the woodwork and some of the stained glass windows, as well as our altar and other liturgical worshipware within the new sanctuary setting. And there's been extensive conversation within the congregation on how we do that and how we do that well. So it both reflects our history and is sensitive to the design of the new worship space.
Okay, good. Thank you for that answer. I have another question for the architect. Could you address the bicycle parking inside? I know that's a question or an issue that we're going to have to address in our review of this, and about the hanged bike spaces and how you're complying with the bike requirement.
I think that would be Andy Laufenberg.
Okay.
Could you unmute Andy?
Yeah, sorry. Brian Reed might actually be able to talk to
Better?
the bike.
Okay. Okay, Brian Reed then. Brian?
Sorry. Yes. So like Mark had mentioned, the overall footprint and an area for the parking is smaller given the total number of stalls. So right now, the thought was that we would be providing one bike stall elevated, mounted on the wall, basically above the front of the vehicle, at the beginning, at the front of the parking stall, so that if the resident needed to access their bike stall, then they would be able to back out their vehicle and, adequately have access to bring their bike down and move it back out. So that basically the stall would be assigned, the bike stall would be assigned to the parking stall, and be assigned to the resident user itself. And that's why some of the condition we have doesn't necessarily provide the full 5-foot accessible aisle that is normally required by zoning.
Where would the other required bike spaces be located then?
There are other bike spaces located within the parking structure. So there are, and I don't recall off the top of my head how many. I think, did Heather say that it was about roughly 40% are bike mounted? The other ones are then accessible for anyone else to be able to utilize and access. Those would be compliant with the 5-foot accessible aisle. and they're kind of scattered throughout the two parking levels in various corners or other areas outside of that elevator lobby.
Okay, so 63 of the required, what would it be, 135 spaces? Is it one per unit?
Basically, yes.
Okay. And then the outside spaces accessible to the entrances, you're proposing to provide those in the terrace areas?
That was the intent, given the site constraints on the tight sites and with the 5-foot setback, and then also the city, we're compliant with providing the additional widened terrace along East Washington Avenue. So the site becomes a little bit smaller there then too. So given the site constraints, we were looking to try to provide them within the terrace through the privilege in the streets agreement.
Okay, and those are approximately 20 spaces as I...
Yes, I think there's 6 shown in front of St. John's and the partnering, and then the rest would be on Hancock for the majority of the residential visitors to use.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Cantrell. Commissioner Solheim.
Thank you. I also had a couple questions related to the bike parking. You mentioned the WIDA storage units, which I'm familiar with. Could you expand? Is there one storage unit per unit? And it looks like they're scattered maybe throughout the building. I guess I was wondering if some of those which are on the lower level and the parking level would also be large enough to accommodate bikes if folks were assigned to those storage units.
There is the requirement that one storage unit be provided for every residential unit. So there are 130 storage units, and those storage units are, I believe, 3 foot by 5 foot by 8 foot required. So you could put a bike in there if you weren't using it for other storage purposes.
Okay. That's all I have right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Alder Heck.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions I assume might be for Mark Binkowski. Mark, in discussions over the previous, I guess it's been almost a year that this project has been floating around, and you've been doing community engagement with neighbors and talking with UDC and staff. There were discussions about the possibility of asking traffic engineering if Hancock could become a two-way street for the first portion of it, just to your parking decks driveway. Did those discussions go anywhere? Because that was a method for keeping cars off of the Mifflin Bike Boulevard.
It's a great question, Alder Heck. Thank you. We did sort of float that, I'll say, as one idea of addressing some of the traffic that would go through the neighborhood. That is still a conversation that we haven't settled with the city. We have the traffic impact analysis now, as well as a preliminary traffic demand management plan. And so we assumed as we move through the approval process, that's a conversation we'd like to have further with city staff and traffic engineering, but it's not a question that has been answered to date.
Okay, thank you. One more question for you. Tell me too about the strategy for delivery drivers and ride share or Lyft, Uber, and all those things. Where will they be parking?
We assume that we will need some sort of temporary, call it a 15-minute loading zone on Hancock Street, just because of, potentially some of the challenges with BRT in East Washington. Again, that's an open question that we need to work with city traffic engineering to understand further, but presumably either on Hancock or East Washington, we'd look to have a temporary loading zone that could be used for those sorts of short-term drop-off.
Thanks. Yeah, I think East Washington is becoming less likely, given that the BRT route will go back from the center to the curb as it approaches the square. But will there be parking allowed on Hancock on that side of the street adjacent to the building, do you think? Maybe that's...
Yeah, it's not a question I can answer. I think there's 2 or 3 street parking stalls along that curb line right now in front of the lower level of St. John's. Again, as we get into those details of traffic engineering, that would be an open question and not one I could answer for you today.
Okay, thank you. And just one more question. What's the status of your, I'll call it a pending agreement with your neighbors on the north, the Hancock Center, with respect to their driveway? And is there the potential for an easement, or how is that being approached?
We assume that there will need to be some sort of easement agreement, since that driveway is going to stretch, or is going to span the property line. Our civil engineer has been working on some plans. One of the things that the Hancock Center would like to consider is potentially modifying the paved area behind their building to add some more parking for them behind the building, because right now they utilize parking alongside St. John's, which is on St. John's property. And so we have a preliminary plan that looks at the modifications that they could make in conjunction with our project. We're kind of still working to optimize that. And so, our engineer is doing that work. And the idea is that once we get to a point where we have a plan that everybody's happy with, then we'd work through any agreement, most likely some form of easement that would be required for that driveway. But we're still kind of working through the details of changes they might want to make on their property in conjunction with that driveway going back behind their building.
Okay, so both parties are engaged, and negotiations seem to be going forward.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Alder. Commissioner Fernandez.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner, Chair. Yeah, I want to go back to the bike parking for just a moment, because really I'm not grasping the logic. It sounds to me like you're saying something like, because there are fewer parking stalls, there can be fewer bike parking stalls, which seems completely backward to me. And even the suggestion that, if a person has a car and the bike is parked in by the car, they can move their car and get to their bike. But really, again, that seems to be missing the point of trying to create low traffic demand. What we're really trying to do is allow somebody to maybe not have a car and have a bicycle. And those people seem very poorly served by this proposal. There don't seem to be anywhere near as many available parking stalls as there are units. So I guess my question is, if we were to not allow that exemption, or that I'm not sure if we were not, to remove that requirement, what would be the problem? Our staff seems to believe that it would be possible to provide that bike parking with the 5-foot access in other ways. Are you convinced that that's not the case?
So right now we do meet the bike parking requirement in terms of the number of bike parking stalls. But as Heather mentioned, half of those, I forget the specific numbers, are through the wall-mounted rack in front of a car. So we do have, I think it's 60 or so floor-mounted stalls, in addition to the 130 storage lockers that a tenant could use. So the challenge is that because we're still meeting the 130, the total number of bike parking stalls, our parking ramp is much smaller than what we would typically see if we had, if we were providing one stall per apartment unit. So the idea is that for, tenants who are commuting every day, there's 60 or so floor mounted, easily accessible bike parking stalls that they can use. And then for those tenants who, don't ride their bikes as much, or maybe have a second bike that they, use for whatever activity, they could store that in front of their vehicle on a wall mounted rack. So it's really just with the reduced amount of parking, there's only so much floor area that we have inside the garage to provide those floor mounted racks, and some of the corners where we would normally put them are being taken up by the storage units that are also required.
Okay, thank you. I think I misunderstood the numbers a little bit. So there are approximately 60 floor-mounted units that do meet the 5-foot requirement. Somehow I was picturing a much lower number there, but you're saying that that number is approximately 60, and the total number is approximately 130.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Spencer.
Yeah, and just talking about the number of bike spaces or bike racks and the amount of space that they take, I was just thinking about e-bikes and how they're not much different from the standard non-e-bikes, but they do have, slightly different space needs. I was wondering if you had thought about what they need in terms of storage. Just curious about that.
The honest answer is we haven't thought about that specifically. I think generally with the size of those, they're comparable to standard bikes where they could use the floor mounted racks inside the garage.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions, Commissioner Spencer?
No,
okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions of registrants? Commissioner Shepard.
Yeah, I just want to make clear this is a question as it relates to the demolition permit question that Commissioner Cantrell brought up earlier. Just want to make sure this is clear. Commissioner Cantrell questioned about the reuse of materials, interior and exterior. I just want to make sure it's clear because this is part of the demolition, once again, sort of standards of approval, that you're not just reusing internal materials and resources and the stained windows, once again, just for, visual purposes, but you're also trying to, as the staff report highlights, trying to give a nod to, again, the Gothic revival style of the building, of its history that the Landmarks Commission did recognize. They also, again, in the staff report, it highlights that, given all of the remodeling that has taken place, that a lot of that historic style has been sort of washed away. But I just want to confirm that that's one of the reasons why you're reusing some of the interior material. Also, why you have, once again, the stained glass windows as a nod to that Gothic revival style.
So I think that probably would be Peter Beeson, the pastor for the church.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, that is correct. We are very much attempting to hold on to and maintain as much of our tradition as possible, and acknowledge that Gothic tradition, as well as look, at how churches function in the rest of the world.
All right, thank you.
Are there any further questions of any of our registrants? I do have one question. How many electric car spots will you be having? Mark?
Yes, I'm just looking at the plan. Potter Lawson might have it more readily at hand. I believe is it 1 or 2? Andy, Brian, do you know the answer offhand? I think it's 2 installed electric vehicle charging stations is my recollection.
I believe it's 2 to be compliant with zoning.
I would urge you, given the fast adoption of electric vehicles, that you consider having considerably more than that to really meet the needs of residents. So I would really encourage you to do something more than just the bare minimum that zoning requires. Are there any other questions of any of our registrants? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. Are there questions of staff? Commissioner Fernandez.
Thank you. This is a question for Heather, which is the very point that you brought up was was the very first thing that popped out at me as I was reviewing the materials, that we have a very difficult to meet requirement with regard to the sidewalk, and yet two very different proposals. So here we're going to a PUD to solve that, and the other one we're requiring or requesting a change in the zoning law, if I'm interpreting that correctly. Why the difference between these two proposals? Do you prefer one solution to the other? Is there a reason why we would why we want to go with a PUD in this one?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I appreciate it. I want to be really honest and say that a huge part of this discrepancy in the way that we're dealing with this or recommending that it be dealt with is due to timing. So this project had come in well before the other one. And when we recognized the issue, brought it to the attention of the development team who worked on some strategies to basically meet the code if they could. We think that it's clear that it's possible. It's actually possible to meet the code, but not desirable. It's not a best outcome for this project and for others that have a similar grade change that they're facing. And the other project that you'll see tonight has a similar grade change to this. It's a much narrower building, but it's in this really tough zone of it's difficult to fully step down a story. It's almost not steep enough to handle it in one way, and it's too steep to handle it in another way. I'm sure there's a better way of explaining this visually, but ultimately, as staff, just in the past couple of weeks, we've come to the realization that as a staff team, we would generally support a text change to allow for some relief especially when grade changes is an issue like this. And, a month and a half ago, when the issue came up with this project that's before you, the best solution in our collective hive mind at that time was to shift to a plan development. Either solution will work and is fine, but it just so happens that they've fallen on the same plan commission evening. And so it's awkward to deal with this very similar challenge in two different ways. But I want to stress that this particular team did undergo a significant delay in their project in order to pivot, and instead, we had to renotice the project as a planned development. It took several weeks of additional time in order for this to come to you this evening as a planned development.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. I had thought the text change seemed a little more straightforward solution to this, but I understand exactly what you're saying. So I have one other question. With regard to the downtown height restrictions, and this may reflect my not perfect understanding of the last meeting where we discussed this. But the additional stories, the downtown height limit is expressed in terms of number of stories. And there is as well a maximum story-to-story height, which results in an absolute limit of X number of feet. Does this building remain under that X number of feet by having a smaller floor-to-floor dimension?
It sure would. And on top of that, it's within an area of the downtown that's identified for up to 10 stories as a conditional use as well.
Okay.
So
okay.
it's kind of twofold. But to your question, if this was in a part of the downtown that only allowed for 8 stories maximum, would it then meet that absolute height maximum that involves that floor-to-floor height and adding those floors together? The answer to that is 99% yes, without having actually done the math.
Okay.
But yeah, I think intuitively it would meet that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Did you have anything else, Commissioner Fernandez?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Alder Paulson.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question about the bike parking. And just so I make sure I understand the numbers, this project meets the requirement for the number of bike parking stalls. But what it doesn't meet is that not all of those stalls have the 5-foot access. Am I understanding that correctly?
That is correct. I want to provide just a clarification on the numbers. So the applicant mentioned earlier, several of our stalls are, quote, the normal 2x6 floor mounted stalls. That number is, from what I can tell, 78. And then there are 54 that are wall mounted in front of the car parking spaces. And so that's how, and I think that is right. I think that it's a few more than they were assuming that they had before. And those stalls are distributed on multiple levels of the parking structure. I did want to mention there's one other strategy that would fit within their existing space, and it is to provide stackable stalls. So hydraulic lift, basically, that assists a bike to stack on top of another bike within the same 2x6 foot area. That would be one other strategy that wouldn't be detrimental to their storage units or their parking stalls or just circulation within the space. So that's something that they could pursue for a portion of these stalls as well, if the Plan Commission had concerns about bike parking stalls being sort of companioned with a car parking stall and hard to get to because of that.
Okay. Well, the companion stalls was actually what I wanted to ask about. And what I'm concerned about is if in the future, if we see this in other places where there are places that there are. So maybe I'm going to ask 2 questions. One, are there other projects that the Plan Commission has approved where they got to the number of bike parking stalls by the Plan Commission waiving the 5-foot access and doing something similar? So yes, there are the number of stalls, but they don't have quite that spacing in order to get to all of them. Feels like maybe we just did that one.
Yes.
Fancy one I liked.
I can't think of particular examples, so I can't really provide ratios, but yes, there are exceptions that have been approved by the Plan Commission.
Okay. And then in general, when the Plan Commission approves them, is that something that the Plan Commission or especially planning staff is like, oh, I really wish they wouldn't do that? And as if we continue to do that, are we setting a bad precedent? And I will put you on the spot a little bit to say, are we putting this on a bad precedent to kind of continue to allow this?
Well, I want to put this in its place in the universe. Basically, what this is, when you go for a plan development zoning, you have an opportunity to ask for relief from any of the general regulations in the zoning code. But those general regulations have to be adhered to unless the Plan Commission provides relief from them. So they're asking, the one they're asking for in this case is related to bike parking. Could be anything, could be landscape requirements, could be auto parking, whatever. I think that your second question is a good one. I would say that it is a case by case basis. We have to think of the context. How walkable is this site? What's the access to transit like? How dependent on bicycles will folks living here be? I guess, when pressed, I can think maybe it's slightly easier here than it would be to support this right on campus or near campus where there are 0 automobile parking stalls, and perhaps you have a more bicycle dependent population. But I do think that bikes are going to be a really important mode of transportation here in this project. One of the concerns that I have is just that those car spaces will be probably assigned to a particular unit. I don't know that for certain, but I'm guessing that they will be. And thus that bike parking stall in front of the car parking stall will also kind of be assigned to the unit. One of the other considerations that came up this evening that you might think about is, well, there are these required storage areas, which not all apartments have, which bikes can fit into if folks aren't storing their Rubbermaid bins and holiday decorations or whatever they might be storing. So that's another safe space to store bikes that might not be used as frequently. I think this is a little bit of a tough one. We've been criticized for over parking our bikes in Madison, but then on the other hand, you sure want to know you have the space for a viable non-automobile mode of transportation built into, to our parking structure. So I think in this case, I'm not that concerned, because if we ran into a problem, they have the space to add the vertical stacked stalls, even if it's at a later date. The physical space is there. Beyond that, one could always convert automobile parking stalls over to bike parking stalls as well. You take 2 auto stalls, it becomes, say, 8, 10 bike parking stalls. Those opportunities are there for the long run. It's not so space constrained that there aren't solutions. I don't know if that helped.
That did actually help a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alder Paulson. Commissioner Cantrell.
Well, I hate to beat the bike parking to death, but I have a question for Heather on this too. But I have the same bike parking that the applicant is proposing. My bike space is hung in front of my car, so that's so I'm familiar with this issue, and it works. But my question is the bike parking in the terrace area. Is the 20 spaces I assume the 20 spaces is a requirement for the entryways into the church and to the apartment building. And that's my first question. My second question, is there any way that we could reduce that number, or would staff be supportive of reducing that number? Because, or is the 5 foot setback along Hancock, is that big enough for a bike parking space so that's outside of the terrace area? So those are my general questions, and Heather, maybe you can address those.
Good questions. I think generally the visitor parking, both for the church use, for the community services use, and then for visitors to the residence, is important. I think it would be kind of tough to see that reduced below the 20 proposed. And I think that perhaps some of you have seen an example where there's like a bike stall that's attached to a building, where the bike parks perpendicular to a building in a pretty tight space between the sidewalk and the building. I think Ace Hardware has some. I think one of the Barrique's coffee places has some of them on South Park Street. That would probably be the only good option between the sidewalk and the building within that 5 foot setback would be to have some bike stalls just parallel to the building face itself. And then you're dealing with, you're right up next to windows. And so I think that's pretty tough. It is pretty normal to see terrace bike parking. And this particular terrace area has a good mix of, unpaved area that could be, planted with street trees, and then paved area that would be for bike parking, not unlike other parts of the immediate downtown where we rely on those terrace areas to support bike parking in a lot of ways. Are there opportunities for creating little niches in the building to stick a few bikes? I'm sure there could be. I haven't dug into the site plan quite well enough to find those niches that wouldn't impact windows and whatnot. But I think, one of the building facades that would be possible for that, where I don't think we want to see it, is right along East Washington, where we have this kind of blank wall, and the Urban Design Commission has really pushed the applicant, and the applicant has wanted to do a lot of significant landscaping, landscape planters in that area. That's probably a better solution than sticking bikes on the building in that area.
Okay. The only thing, in looking at the site plan, it looks like they eliminated a tree for bike parking, and I don't want to eliminate any trees. Okay. So I guess I would like to see staff obviously look at those locations. But anyway, thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Commissioner Cantrell. Is it okay? Are there other questions of staff? Seeing none, we need a motion. Commissioner Cantrell.
Well, I'm going to try to put this together. I'm going to recommend that the Plan Commission approve, first of all, the demolition of the existing place of worship at 310 to 322 East Washington Avenue.
Okay. Is there a second? Seconded by Alder Heck. Did you wish to speak to your motion, Commissioner Cantrell?
Yeah, just briefly, I think it's unfortunate that the church is being demolished, and I know there's obviously lots of history here that dates back to the beginnings of Madison. But I think in this case, the trade-offs and the wishes that the church wants to remain on site, and also the just proposal that we're creating affordable housing here in place of this location, and the church remains, and the church is incorporating pieces, interior pieces of the church that dates back, I'm assuming, to the turn of the century. I think it's important, and that's why I'm recommending this demolition. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there other comments, input? Alder Figueroa Cole.
Like this before. Thank you for unmuting me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I haven't seen a project like this before during my term here, but I am excited to see this going up, and it's just an example of how churches are, at least this church is looking on evolving with the times and with the needs and priorities of the city. And it will be great for the commissioners or to kind of maybe take that kind of momentum and see if there are any ordinances or rules or laws that become that can make these processes even easier for other churches to transition and evolve the same way. I mean, this is an opportunity to make our laws more in tune with times. So I really appreciate the entire project, and I see so much opportunity for us to grow as a city, and especially when it comes to the way that the ordinances become barriers instead of serving the people. So thank you for the project, and thank you for all the discussion. learn a lot tonight.
Thank you, Alder. Any other comments before we come to a vote? Alder Paulson.
On there to make sure that we have as a condition the written intention for that the parking the driveway, so that we're gonna I know they're in negotiations right now, but I would like that as a condition that if they're gonna skip the fence and
I think that probably would be
oh wait, I'm sorry, we're on the demolition.
Yeah, we're on
never mind. Hang on.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I thought we were going to vote all of a sudden. Wait a second. I've got stuff to add. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else? If not, we'll come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hand, the motion passes unanimously. Now we're on to agenda item 6, which is the zoning. Do I have a motion? Commissioner Cantrell.
I will recommend that the Plan Commission forward the zoning map amendment, rezoning 310 to 322 East Washington Avenue from UMX to PD to allow construction of a 10-story mixed-use building to the City Council with a recommendation of approval, subject to the conditions within the report, noting that it complies with the standards of the PUD, that Urban Design has indicated their support for the additional 2 floors for the building, that we also grant them relief of the screening requirement for the north side of the building, with the condition that the developer provide staff with a written, support and information that is approved by both parties, with the church and the neighbor to the north. That the grading change, which supports this plan as proposed, be supported for this specific site, and that the bicycle parking in front of the cars as proposed by the applicant also be supported and as a condition of approval, as well as the parking within the terrace, with the condition that staff work with the developer so that the no trees, street trees, terrace trees be removed from the terrace area.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Seconded by Commissioner Fernandez. Did you wish to speak to your motion, Commissioner Cantrell?
Just again, briefly, this is, I think, an extraordinary project. And I think that affordable housing, obviously, every meeting, we see apartments being constructed, but not many affordable housing units, and this provides those. And I think it's a unique combination of having a church and which mission is to serve the community. I think this is an attractive building, and I think the bicycle parking arrangements will work. And I think if they find that they need more bike parking spaces, that the stacked bike spaces could be provided in the future. But again, we need housing. This is a great site for housing. The plans that we have approved in the downtown support additional density in this area. And that's why I'm recommending it wholeheartedly be approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other comments? Commissioner Solheim.
Thank you. Just quickly, I echo everything that Commissioner Cantrell just said. I also wanted to add, I really appreciate the additional service and programming space on the first floor for the partnerships that the congregation already has and will continue to grow. That's such a key component in partnership with the affordable housing. So really excited to see this move forward. Thanks.
Alder Paulson.
Yeah, I also wanted to say thanks, and I'm excited about this project. I wanted to say thank you to St. John's, who have been a important part of the community with their space, with the homeless night shelter for so many years, and I'm excited that they are continuing that bit of service and going up and continuing to find housing for folks in the community. Just to add on to the bike parking, I think that the solution is workable, and relief here is justified on the 5-foot access. It's right on BRT. It's super walkable. So I appreciate that they are going below 1 unit per one parking stall per unit, but still finding ways to make it bike parking possible. So I appreciate that and think that the relief there is justified. And look forward to seeing this project move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Paulson. Alder Heck.
On the portion of the motion related to the street trees. Could we just make sure that we all understand that? Because I studied the street tree situation before the meeting, and so I want to make sure it works out.
Okay, the way I understand the motion and the amendment would be that the bike parking would not supplant trees that would otherwise be planted in the terrace. Is that correct, Commissioner Cantrell? Yes. If you want to speak, I'm going to have to unmute me. You're going to have to unmute yourself. No? Okay.
I think that answers my question. I just wanted to make sure that there is a tree that's going to be taken down that's in the middle of the proposed driveway. So I wanted to make sure we understood that was going to go out, and I'm hoping for no net loss of trees.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great.
I would just like to add one thing. I worked with St. John's, I think, even when I almost had not been an alder for very long, and they just had a pie in the sky idea about how can they do affordable housing development, and that's all they knew they wanted, and they doggedly pursued this and figured out who the appropriate people were to work with, and they should really be proud of themselves. And Pastor Peter Beeson, I think, was one of the main motivators of that. But the congregation itself recognized, I think, that that it was shrinking, and that a lot of the folks that attend don't live downtown anymore. So they were looking to reinvent not just the congregation, but also provide an important service. So kudos to them. Thanks.
Thank you, Alder. Commissioner Fernandez.
Thank you. I just want to add my thanks to St. John's for adhering to that mission that I just think is admirable, to the architects for a sensitive approach to it, solving problems, and to Commissioner Cantrell for an exceptionally complete motion and I wanted to add the tiniest thing to it that maybe is already understood, that the applicant will apply for and receive privilege in streets for any use of the bike parking. That may not need to be added to the motion, but I think it's understood that the applicant will then thereby become responsible for the maintenance of that terrace space.
Yeah, I think you're right that that's clear in numerous places in the material. So, but thank you for emphasizing that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Alder Harrington McKinney.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I've been listening, and I was not going to raise my hand, but ironically, on Saturday, I met a person, an individual who's doing their internship at St. John, and was talking about this movement and what you'll be voting on. And it's exceptional, and I wanted to make sure that I added my voice to it because this week we met at our own church an elderly woman who has been moved 5 times. And when you look at the commitment that St. John is making to people like that, it's exciting. And so I'm certainly pleased that St. John continues to do the work. They've been invested in downtown and providing shelter for such a long time. And so I just wanted to make sure that I added my voice to it and to say that I'm absolutely thrilled and would be very supportive of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Anything else before we come to a vote? Heather.
Thank you. We just missed the second. Can someone who seconded the motion raise their hand? Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Seeing no raised hands, we'll come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hand, the motion passes unanimously. Moving on, we are now on agenda items 7 and 8, which are related, and we will consider them as one public hearing. Agenda item 7, Legistar 74542, 131 West Wilson Street, 4th Alder District, consideration of a conditional use in the urban mixed-use district for a new building greater than 20,000 square feet and more than 4 stories, and consideration of a conditional use pursuant to Madison General Ordinances for projections into the Capitol View preservation limit to allow construction of a 15-story apartment building containing 263 apartments. Agenda item 8, Legistar 74902, approving a certified survey map of property owned by The Moment Residences, LLC, located at 131 West Wilson Street, 4th Alder District. First, we will hear from planning staff member Colin Punt. Colin.
Yes, thank you again. So back on June 27, I'm sure you'll all recall that the Plan Commission approved a demolition permit to demolish the 12-story office building here at 131 West Wilson Street. The applicant is now seeking approval of the necessary conditional uses to construct a 15-story mixed-use building with 263 residential units and about 6,900 square feet of commercial space, as well as the CSM creating 1 lot. I want to note 3 conditional use approval standards that may need a little bit more discussion. First, regarding approval standard 7, similar to the proposal just considered on East Washington Avenue, because of the slope of the site and the sidewalk, the average elevation of the floor of the first story is about 2.5 feet above the average elevation of the sidewalk, which is greater than the 18 inches allowed by the code. Zoning staff have recommended a condition of approval that if not redesigned to meet the requirement of the code, that prior to final approval, either a variance is requested and granted, or a zoning code text amendment be pursued. Planning staff, as Heather noted, are supportive of the zoning text amendment for the section cited there. and we believe it would better address sites with changes to the elevation, such as this. Regarding standard of approval 9, the UDC has made an advisory recommendation to the Plan Commission to approve the project with a list of conditions, which are listed in the recommended conditions of approval, as well as the expectation that the design return to UDC for review of those recommended conditions and final approval. Staff notes that UDC's review is advisory to the Plan Commission, and the Commission does have the ability to confirm or modify any of the design conditions as the Commission finds necessary to meet the standard. Finally, regarding Standard 17, which regards the Capitol View preservation height limit, the building parapet is about 1.5 feet below the cap view height limit. The building's elevator overrun extends a bit less than 6 feet above the cap view height. No rooftop mechanical equipment or mechanical yards are shown on the proposed plans. Staff understands that no additional mechanical projections are proposed at this time. We do note that the projection is smaller than others that have been approved recently in terms of height and area. And while staff believe that the Commission could find the standard met, any expansion of the intrusions above the Capitol View height limit would likely necessitate a major alteration to the conditional use, and that would come back to Plan Commission. All things considered, staff do believe the Commission can find the standards of approval for the conditional uses, and the certified survey can be found met. And thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I will open the public hearing. The first registrant is Jake Buns in support, wishing to speak. And if you could clarify, Jake, who you're representing.
Yes, I'm representing the developer, the Moment Enterprises. So I'd like to be part of the presentation if we want to start that now, unless there's any other.
Yes, you've got 3 minutes.
Okay. And there's 3 of us, myself, Kirk, and Garrett. We'll try to combine our presentation.
Oh, you wanted to combine into 9 minutes?
Yes, please.
For all 3 of you? Okay, very good. Then go ahead, Jake, and 9 minutes total.
Sounds good. Thank you. I'm Jake Buns, the development manager for the Moment Residences. We appreciate you guys giving us an opportunity to present to you guys tonight. We are very eager to receive entitlements for this development so that we can begin demolition on the structurally compromised existing building at 131. We've received lots of excellent feedback and input from city staff, UDC, the Bassett Neighborhood Committee, steering committees, and our neighbors. So we're excited to present you guys with plans that we think showcase a depth of design for the site and will add to the character of the Madison skyline. With that, Kirk will kind of take over and run through the presentation, and he'll be followed up by Kirk's our architect, and he'll be followed up by Garrett Perry, our landscape architect. Thanks.
Okay, then the next registrant, Kurt Keller, Camelot Drive, Madison support, and switching from not wishing to speak to wishing to speak, representing T-Wall Enterprises. And I would note that there is not a Garrett Perry registered that I see, but maybe he was a late registrant. So go ahead, Kirk.
Thank you very much. This evening, just quickly, I'd like to leave the majority of time open for the commission to ask their questions. We've worked extensively with the neighborhood associations, with city engineering to develop a unique building that is really meant to be a downtown residence with 263 units. Next image, please. This is the view from John Nolan Drive at a sunset view. Next image, please. An idea of that is very important to the planning here is that the building is stepped into the site. So we're trying not to block off the view to Lake Monona. Some recent developments on the other side of the Capitol really have put up a strong wall. This is really meant to step back and to open up the view for how the users will be living with the building, create a few more corners and good street view through to it. Next image, please. First floor, very important. If there are any questions here, this is where I'll finish my presentation and talk about that we're keeping all trash within the building. We're making the previous building, the current building there, it is not handicap accessible. We're making it completely handicap accessible, bringing activation to the street, and also allowing enough of height so that we can pull a number of service vehicles inside the building and to be able to move services completely screened from the enclosed garage. So creating a different complete street dynamic from the existing buildings there at a parking ratio that's close to 1-to-1. We're working to get there. And as we work into the water table in Lake Monona. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It doesn't appear that we do have anyone by the name of Garrett Perry registered to speak. And so that concludes the registrants noting that they wish to speak. Jonathan Lilly also registered. Furrier Drive, Madison in support, not wishing to speak, representing Veerbecker. Are there questions of any of our registrants? Commissioner Fernandez.
Thank you. I noted in the conditions, and I'm not sure I understood it, I believe that engineering is requiring dedication of a 5-foot pedestrian easement or something to accommodate a sidewalk. Could you explain what that is about? Is this
a question for staff or registrants?
Well, maybe it's a question for staff. But I thought it might be a question for the registrant, for the applicants. You know, is there something being proposed on the Wilson side of this that other than a conventional sidewalk in the right of way?
Okay, so maybe that's Kurt Keller.
Thank you very much. If we could proceed forward into, I'm going to try to do my best landscape architecture here. If you could keep going, right there is great. The developer, since the UDC works within the confines of the property, the street development that you see on the right as the city develops a cycle track along Wilson, we saw a wonderful opportunity to develop additional trees, landscaping, and we're going to be approaching city with a complete developer agreement for maintenance of an area adjacent to just to the very right edge of this. You can kind of see a wheel of a bike there. In addition, if you're familiar with the building that's there now, we've approximately 18 to 24 inches, I forget the number. The whole sidewalk area is widened. The building is pushed back. The city requested additional space. That space is being granted, so it's allowing us the space to develop what you're seeing here.
Okay.
Any further questions, Commissioner?
I don't think so. I think I understand it. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Commissioner Cantrell.
I see on your site plan that you have a loading area. Is that loading area for the trash collection, or will that be done inside the building, or is that loading area for move in, move out, or what do you plan to use in that area, that space?
Chair, may I answer that question?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Center to the plan, you can see the trash room, that there are chutes in the building running the full height for recycling and for trash, with a garage door just at the top of that room, which would be manually moved across the building to the loading area where trash trucks would back up to a separate door there that allows for the trash removal to occur while still vehicles can move in and out from the main tenant doors. Okay. And
there's also a space, it identifies moving trucks. What size moving trucks would that accommodate?
Great question. We discussed this with the neighborhood at length, that of the 263 units, about 179 are true studios, studios with sleeping chambers, one bedrooms, and that accommodates not to promote any brand here, but a U-Haul truck that is sized for moving a one-bedroom apartment. That doesn't preclude, that somebody could bring a trailer or multiple moves or something. But the vast majority of move-ins could be handled simply by pulling a vehicle inside the building. And you note that at the back of the elevator lobby, that there's doors that allow direct access to the elevators. So we were sensitive to, a lot of the meetings that we had with the neighborhood association was trying to keep Wilson as open as possible.
Okay. And lastly, where are you providing the bike parking, bike spaces within the building? I see lots of parking spaces, but where are those being located?
So there's a multiple pieces that are happening in this particular plan. You can see that there's a double stack of bike parking in just left of center right there. I have to add on to your question that we're also providing an extensive amount of electrical for e-bikes in here. And so this double tier is meant the lower level are for the heavier e-bikes, and the upper level is where I'm avid biker and my road bike is going up there. And then we've purposely worked to place bike parking throughout the building. We are taking advantage of 25% of bike parking being in front of cars. We have this locked for higher value bikes room that I just pointed out. And then the rest of the parking, it meets all city standards for size of bike stalls, clearances, and they're purposely scattered throughout the parking garage to, if you want it at the lowest level or, at an intermediate level.
Okay. Thank you. One last question. The Urban Design Committee had a number of recommended changes on I assume the exterior of the building, since that's what they review. Have you incorporated those in this submittal, or is that something that you haven't done at this point in time?
Thank you. We'll be returning with a submittal to UDC to meet all those requirements at the submission for, I believe it's a submission date of January 30th.
Okay.
And then it would come back for staff review then after that.
Okay. But the renderings that you show in your renderings now, they didn't incorporate the urban design suggestions.
They do not.
Okay.
This was it's just on the way the scheduling was handled.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cantrell. Are there further questions of our registrants? Seeing no raised hands, I will close the public hearing. Are there questions of staff? Are there questions of staff? Commissioner Solheim.
Thank you. I just have one quick question on the Capitol View preservation limit. So if I'm reading the staff report correctly, when the final plans are submitted, say for the final land use submittal and building permit, those will be reviewed against the limits we have in the staff report, and if they're higher, they would come back. It seems like there was not all of the detail for the rooftop. I just want to make sure that doesn't change drastically in the future.
Heather?
I can take that one.
Oh, you can take that, Colin. Thank you.
Yes. So right now, as I noted, they're not showing a mechanical yard, any of the big air handling equipment that one would normally see. If the plans come back and they've had to add those, or the elevator overrun jumps up to 12 feet or something like that, that would come back as a major alteration. I think if the elevator overrun went from, I believe it's 5 feet 8 right now to 5 feet 11, I think we would handle that as a minor alteration or kind of just a progression of the engineering design. So it would I think it would depend on the scale of the change, but any sort of mechanical yard, I believe, would have to come back as a major alteration.
Okay. And I noticed your comment too about solar panels. This is more just a general question. So those cannot impede, they're not part of the current language that it could go into that limit. Is that correct? Even a little bit?
That's correct. State statute clearly lists the intrusions that are allowed, and solar panels are not one of those.
Okay. That's all I have. Thanks so much.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Fernandez.
Thank you. So my question is with regard to the slope on the sidewalk and the elevation of the first floor. Could you word an amendment for us? I mean, are we looking for an amendment that says something like the applicant, this is conditioned on the applicant receiving a zoning code amendment, or is there some other? In other words,
yeah, I believe it's condition 4 already in the staff report. It came from the zoning staff. I can.
Okay, so that's taken care of, really. That's from our standpoint.
It's already in there.
Subject to the condition is already in there. Okay.
Yes.
Did you have anything else, Commissioner Fernandez?
It sounds like in terms of having this returned to UDC for final approval, does that require a condition on our part?
That condition is already in under the planning, the recommended conditions from the planning division as well.
Okay, so if we simply endorse those conditions,
yes,
we've taken care of that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Alder Paulson.
Yeah, there's a condition here that says they have to come back with a CSM, and I think this is the first time I've seen a project where the CSM wasn't sort of marching along at the same time. So I just wondered if staff could just kind of talk us through kind of what that is. How fast does the CSM move? And does that come back to us? Does that go straight to council? What happens on that?
That condition actually snuck in there, I think, unintentionally. Are you looking at condition 39
yes.
under the city engineering mapping?
Yep.
The applicant has submitted that CSM, and we are recommending that the Plan Commission send that on to council with a recommendation to approve.
Okay.
So I'm sorry I included that one. I should have addressed that.
Heather, did you have anything that you wanted to add? You had your hand up.
Just wanted to note that it is possible, though. In fact, the St. John's proposal has a condition of approval to bring forth the certified survey map later. So you can approach it in either way. Basically, just before there's construction of a new building that would cross an existing lot line, that certified survey map would have to be finished, approved, and recorded. And so it usually happens in conjunction with an approval like this 131 West Wilson, but St. John's that you just approved is an example where it's going to come back later.
Okay, I thought St. John's didn't have one because it didn't change its footprint, but okay.
Okay.
All right. All right. Thank you. Yeah, that helps.
Okay. Thank you. Any further questions of staff? And I'm going to ask Alder Verveer, did you wish to speak now or later?
Thank you, Chair Zellers. I'm happy to provide some testimony now or at a later point, whatever your pleasure.
Why don't you go ahead now before the Motion's made.
For the motion this time. Very good. Thank you. Well, this is obviously a downtown agenda tonight. So thank you all for your consideration of all things downtown this evening. Let me begin by stating the obvious, perhaps, and that is there is a lot going on in the 100 block of West Wilson Street proposed for this year. As a reminder, you approved and construction is well underway on a multifamily building on this block at the corner of South Henry Street. Obviously, the public safety building expansion was already recommended for approval by you this evening. And there's a proposal sandwiched in between this proposal for the future of 131 West Wilson Street and that apartment building that's currently under construction. 139 West Wilson Street is scheduled to appear before the Urban Design Commission on Wednesday for the third time for informational presentation to share the progression of that proposal. So there is quite a bit going on. And then if that wasn't enough, as has already been mentioned, the city is planning as part of a Wilson Street reconstruction project to install a cycle track for bicyclists, a two-way cycle track for bicyclists on this very block later this year. So there is a lot going on, a lot of construction impacts, conflicts, potentially, and so on and so forth. So with that said, I do appreciate that the timing of all this can be quite overwhelming for some of us. My remarks will be somewhat similar to what I shared with you earlier tonight regarding Dane County's application in terms of concerns about traffic impacts and so forth. So because of the amount of activity going on in this space, the fact that this cycle track is scheduled to be installed later this year, which would change the traffic patterns somewhat on the street, including the current loading zones, including having peak hour restrictions for the parking on this block. I and neighborhood stakeholders still do have some outstanding worries relating to how the traffic engineering functions are going to be efficient, if assuming that this proposal is approved and built. I think it was Kirk mentioned in his testimony, this has been an issue early and often for neighborhood stakeholders. I do want to thank publicly Jake and Kirk and other members of their development team for meeting early and often with the neighborhood association. They've met several times with us. We had a larger publicly noticed neighborhood meeting in November at Monona Terrace. That was a hybrid option. And so there has been the opportunity for a lot of input and feedback. And I think that's why you see the lack of registrants tonight wishing to speak before you. I will point out to the commission that there is, I think, a very appropriate written testimony from one of the Bassett neighborhood activists, Pete Ostland, going into some detail about concerns about commercial delivery, especially move in and move out, and that function as well. And again, this is a topic throughout all of the conversations with stakeholders, especially knowing that it's highly not only likely, but a truism that density will greatly increase on this block, both this year and in coming years. So with that said, I would respectfully request that the commission consider adding a condition consistent with your previous action tonight across the street, that a commercial delivery and waste removal plan be submitted by the applicant to traffic engineering staff for their approval. And you can add, or just say city staff, if planning staff as well would review that. But I think that it's important to be consistent and realize that in some respects this might be even more of a challenge given the city's intent to indeed construct that cycle track adjacent to this, what will be a very dense building. Overall, the concept has been warmly supported by the neighborhood. The issues relating to the design. I am very pleased with the work of the Urban Design Commission. Pleased to hear that the architect, Kirk Keller, tonight said that the design progression is well underway to address the UDC's outstanding concerns, and that they'll be before UDC in the near future for final approval. Given the highly visible, really landmark location of this building, it was imperative that UDC roll up their sleeves collectively and do the hard work on this, and I think they're to be congratulated for that. There are some aspects of the images that I think stakeholders were not excited about overall, though I think the design has been embraced by neighborhood stakeholders. One aspect on the images that I've been receiving some questions about, but I've assured my constituents that the sign code will not allow for the amount of signage that's proposed in some of the images that were shared with the neighborhood previously. So that's something I wanted to get out there as well. So I appreciate UDC's good work. I appreciate Colin, including their conditions and the proposed conditions for you to include as you consider the conditional use permit tonight. Aside from the design issues, I think it's also imperative that I say, as you've heard me say before, as if it's as a broken record, but it's important to be said, that it is unfortunate that there is no level of low-cost housing in this proposal. I want you to know that I did have heart-to-heart conversations with the development team, namely with Terrence Wall and Jake about that option. Jake could have confirmed for you tonight if asked. They did, I think, somewhat at least seriously consider making an application for city financial participation in the project, be it TIF and or affordable housing funds, most likely the former, and decided after running their pro formas and so forth that they felt this had to remain 100% market rate multifamily project. And I understand that, and I accept that, and realize that it's hard to ask for some level of low cost housing with the phenomenal lake views and so forth, that were guaranteed to be uninterrupted, considering this prominent location backing on John Nolan Drive. But it is yet again the latest example of 100% market rate housing being considered by your august commission downtown. That I do consider a lost opportunity, unfortunately. Aside from that, I do think that this will be a very interesting conversation relating to the improvements proposed in the public right of way. Conceptually, they look fantastic and beautiful, and I hope that as we're working toward the development agreement between the city and the developer on what improvements will be made to the public right of way, that robust landscaping is allowed to be included. I know from past experience that is often not the case, and I do worry about that, and also worry about long-term maintenance. And so it will be interesting with the widened sidewalk and the bicycles, again, amenities being improved in this area, to see how this will all work and mesh, including again the loading. So I'll close with again respectfully requesting that you include the same condition relating to a commercial delivery waste removal plan for traffic engineering to have more of an involvement in this proposal beyond their conditions that they have already suggested tonight as part of the staff report, and well beyond the construction impacts that will take place this year with the cycle track construction and the other construction on private property, and in the case of the county public property on the block. So thank you for your consideration. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Alder. Appreciate your input. Now I would be looking for a motion. Commissioner Cantrell.
I will recommend that the Plan Commission find that the standards for the conditional use are met for a 15-story mixed-use building in the UMX district, subject to the conditions within our report. Also noting that this site will need an amendment to the zoning code to allow the slope as proposed by this building. And that a condition be added that commercial deliveries and waste removal plan be submitted to city staff for review and approval.
Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Solheim. Commissioner Cantrell, did you wish to speak to your motion?
Yes, I think that this is obviously a great site for housing. And, it's unfortunate that some affordable units aren't being provided, but I can understand with the site particulars here that that's probably not economically feasible for this project. But it is consistent with our downtown plan. And I think the slope issue that has been raised by both projects that we reviewed tonight needs a zoning amendment. I think that this has come up before on a project on the opposite side of Wilson Street. And I think just because of the nature of the slope and the capital that we have sitting on a hill, that an amendment to the code is necessary here. But I believe that the plan is consistent with our conditional use standards and our plans, and that's why I'm recommending it be supported. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there any other comments or input before we come to a vote? Seeing no raised hands, we'll come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. Now we need a motion regarding the certified survey map. Commissioner Cantrell.
I will recommend that the Plan Commission forward the certified survey map to the Common Council with a recommendation of approval.
Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Solheim. Commissioner Cantrell, did you wish to speak to your motion?
Not this one, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there any input? Comments? No. Seeing none, we'll come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. And now we are at business by members. Any business by members? Commissioner Cantrell.
I just wanted to note to the Plan Commission that I will not be here for the next two meetings, but we'll be back for the second meeting in February.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Fernandez.
Thanks. I'd just like to note that I will be missing the February 13th meeting as well.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else from members? Seeing none, we'll move on to the Secretary's report. Heather.
Thank you. Just a quick reminder to fill out statement of interest forms if you've not already. I have not heard that we have any outstanding forms, but I will try to find that out and reach out to you individually if that's the case. Let's see, looking back at the January 3rd Common Council meeting, the council did move forward with all of the Plan Commission recommendations as they came to them. So the Roth Street, the former Hartmeyer site has been approved for the lot division in that case, and the 415 North Lake Street project, the rezoning for the Lake Street ramp to the mixed use building has also been approved by the council. Those are the most notable items. And then also the transit-oriented development ordinance was delayed until January 17th, and staff are going to be holding a virtual meeting this Thursday, open to anyone, but really focused on the TOD ordinance and how it relates to historic districts, since that is of interest to many. And then that should go to the January 17th council meeting. Looking forward to our January 23rd meeting. A couple of highlights. We'll have a project nearing 500 new housing units on Portage Road, 4205 Portage Road, in a multi-building complex. And then I think the next most notable piece is out at the American Center, 4846 East Park Boulevard. There's a collection of rezonings and a plat for a pretty significant reconfiguration of lots and integration of residential use out in that American Center area. That is consistent with one of the comprehensive plan notes, and exciting to see that happen. And then I'll mention on our February 13th meeting, the first item is a far west side residential plat creating 74 new single family lots. I think that's where I'll leave it this evening. Thanks so much for your time. And again, Happy New Year, everyone.
Thank you, Heather. Okay, then we'd be looking for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Commissioner Cantrell. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Solheim. And I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, motion passes unanimously. We are adjourned, and I will see most of you on January 23rd. Take care. Thank you very much.